Hello guys, welcome to Cosmic Wand. Today we have an incredible story for you. Harry was betrayed and tortured to death by everyone but got reincarnated in the Addams family and joined Nevermore. If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Died. The chains were the worst part. Not the pain. Harry had made his peace with pain a long time ago. Not the cold of the stone floor beneath him, or the damp that had settled into his bones so thoroughly he'd forgotten what warmth felt like. Not even the darkness, because he'd lived in a cupboard for 10 years and darkness was an old companion. No. It was the chains. They were goblin-forged, etched with binding runes that pulsed a sickly orange every time his magic tried to push against them. They didn't just hold his wrists and ankles to the wall, they drank from him. Every hour, every minute, they siphoned a little more of his magic, feeding it into the ward stones of the Ministry's deepest holding level. Sublevel 9. Below the Department of Mysteries. Below the veil. Below everything. He hadn't known this place existed until they dragged him here. Harry let his head fall back against the stone and stared at the ceiling he couldn't see. His glasses were gone, smashed under Ron's boot 3 weeks ago, or maybe 4. Time had gotten slippery down here. There were no windows, no clocks, no meals at regular intervals. Sometimes the torches in the corridor outside his cell flared to life and someone came. Sometimes they didn't. He heard footsteps now. 2 sets. One heavy and familiar, one lighter, quicker, heels clicking on stone. The iron door groaned open and torchlight flooded in, and Harry didn't flinch because flinching was something he'd trained out of himself in another life, in a cupboard under the stairs, and he'd be damned if he'd learn it again now. Ron Weasley ducked through the doorway first. He'd filled out since the war, broad-shouldered, thick-necked, wearing his head aura robes like he'd been born in them. His face was ruddy and set in that expression Harry had once mistaken for determination but now recognized as the look of a man who'd convinced himself he was doing the right thing and couldn't afford to question it. Hermione came in behind him. She looked immaculate. Ministry robes pressed and clean, hair tamed into a severe bun, a leather folder tucked under one arm. She'd risen fast after the war, undersecretary to the minister at 23, youngest in history. Harry remembered being proud of her. That felt like remembering a dream someone else had. Harry, Hermione said, and her voice was the same. That was the cruelest part. She still sounded like the girl who'd brewed polyjuice in a bathroom, who'd punched Malfoy, who'd stood beside him when everyone else had turned away. You look terrible. That happens when people chain you in a dungeon and forget to feed you on Tuesdays, Harry said. His voice was a wreck, cracked and rough, but the words came out steady. Is it Tuesday? I've lost track. It's Thursday, Ron said. He didn't look at Harry directly. Hadn't, not once, since the first day. He looked at Harry's chains, at the wall behind him, at the floor. Anywhere else? We brought the papers again. And I'll tell you the same thing I told you last Thursday, and the Thursday before that. Harry shifted, and the chains sang a discordant note as they tightened. No. Hermione opened her folder. Harry knew what was inside without seeing it. He'd had every page described to him in detail. The Magical Heritage Preservation Act, a law she'd written herself, pushed through the Wisengamot while Harry was still being celebrated as the savior. It was elegant, he'd give her that. Under the Act, any witch or wizard deemed to possess disproportionate magical power could be required to submit to a binding, a permanent reduction of their core to safe and manageable levels. The excess magic would be redistributed to the ward stones protecting magical Britain. For the greater good, the Act said. For the safety of all. Harry was the only wizard it had ever been applied to. The second document was a transfer of all Potter and Black assets to the Ministry's discretionary fund. The third was a marriage contract, Harry to Ginny Weasley, binding, unbreakable, with a clause that any children would be wards of the Ministry until their magic could be assessed. They wanted everything. His magic, his money, his bloodline, his freedom. They wanted to hollow him out and wear him like a suit. The Wiesendamat has approved escalated measures, Hermione said, and she said it the way she'd once recited textbook passages, clinical, detached, as if the words were just information and not a death sentence. If you don't sign voluntarily, they'll authorize forced binding. The process is. Harry, it's not painless. The voluntary version is controlled, measured. The forced version will probably kill me, Harry finished. Yeah. Kingsley mentioned that when he came down here last week. Right before he hit me with a cruciatus to soften me up. He paused. Funny. I thought he was one of the good ones. Ron's jaw tightened. He didn't want to do that. Well, he did a bang-up job for someone who didn't want to. Harry, please. Hermione took a step closer, and for a moment, just a moment, he saw something crack in her expression. Something that might have been guilt, or grief, or just the discomfort of seeing the consequences of her choices up close. This doesn't have to be difficult. Sign the papers. The binding is painless, you'll barely notice the reduction, and you'll be free to what? Harry's voice didn't rise. He'd stopped raising his voice weeks ago. Shouting took energy he didn't have, and besides, quiet words hit harder down here where the walls ate sound. Free to marry Ginny and produce magical children for you to study. Free to smile for the cameras and tell everyone the system works. Free to be your puppet with just enough magic left to be useful but not enough to be dangerous. He looked at Hermione, really looked at her, with those green eyes that the darkness and the pain and the starvation hadn't managed to dull. You don't want me free, Hermione. You want me tame. She closed the folder. The crack in her expression sealed over, smooth as fresh ice. You have until Monday, she said. After that, the Wiesendamat will proceed with forced binding. I won't be able to stop it. You wrote the law that allows it. For the greater good, don't. The word came out sharp enough to cut, and Hermione actually stopped. Don't you dare use that phrase. You know who else loved that phrase. You know. Silence. The torches guttered. Ron cleared his throat. Come on, Hermione. He's not going to listen. They left. The door groaned shut. The darkness came back, and Harry was alone with the chains and the cold and the slow, steady drain of everything he was. He closed his eyes. Monday, they'd said. He had until Monday. Harry Potter had been a lot of things in his life. An orphan. A weapon. A symbol. A sacrifice. He'd walked into a forest and let a killing curse hit him in the chest because a dead man's plan required it. He'd come back, because the plan required that too. He'd killed a Dark Lord in front of 1,000 witnesses, and they'd cheered, and he'd thought, stupidly, naively, with the desperate hope of a boy who'd never been loved properly, that it was over. That he'd done enough. That he could rest. He should have known better. People like him didn't get to rest. People like him were used until there was nothing left, and then they were discarded, and the world moved on and told itself a nice story about how it had all been necessary. Monday came faster than he expected. They brought more people this time. Kingsley Shacklebolt, Minister for Magic, who couldn't quite meet Harry's eyes. Arthur Weasley, who stood in the back and said nothing and looked like he was attending a funeral. Ginny, who stood beside her mother and wore an expression of righteous certainty that made Harry's stomach turn. Molly, who kept saying, "It's for the best, dear," in that suffocating voice that had once meant home. And others. Aurors he'd trained with. Order members he'd fought beside. Neville, and that one hurt, God, that one carved a piece out of him, standing stiffly in the corner with his Auror badge gleaming, not meeting Harry's eyes. They'd brought a ritual circle. Portable, painted on a leather sheet that unrolled across the floor of his cell. Runes he recognized, binding runes, siphoning runes, containment arrays. And some he didn't, which was worse, because Harry had studied every branch of magic he could get his hands on after the war, and if he didn't recognize these runes, they were either ancient, forbidden, or invented for this specific purpose. Harry James Potter, Kingsley said, and his voice was formal, ministerial, emptied of everything that had once made it warm. By order of the Wisengamot, under the authority of the Magical Heritage Preservation Act, you are hereby subject to compulsory magical binding. Do you have any final words before the procedure commences? Harry looked at them. All of them. Every face. He memorized them, not out of hatred, not yet, but because he wanted to remember. He wanted to carry the knowledge of what they were into whatever came next. Yeah, he said. I do. He looked at Ron. You were my first friend. I would have died for you. I almost did, more than once. He looked at Hermione. You were the smartest person I ever knew. I trusted your judgment more than my own. That was my mistake. He looked at Ginny. I loved you. Or I thought I did. I'm not sure I knew what love was supposed to feel like. I don't think you taught me. He looked at Neville. I expected better from you. Neville flinched like he'd been hit. Go ahead, Harry said. Do what you're going to do. They activated the circle. The pain was immediate and absolute. Harry had been hit with the Cruciatus curse more times than he could count, by Voldemort, by Bellatrix, by Kingsley in this very cell, and this was worse. The Cruciatus was fire along the nerves, a physical agony that the body understood even as it screamed. This was something else entirely. This reached into the core of him, into the place where his magic lived, where it had lived since before he was born, woven into his soul like thread into cloth, and it pulled. He felt himself tearing. Not his body. His body was secondary, collateral damage, blood running from his nose and ears and the corners of his eyes. His self was tearing. His magic, his beautiful, wild, powerful magic that had saved him and saved others and been the one thing that was truly, unequivocally his, was being ripped out of him strand by strand, and each strand took a memory with it. His Patronus, the stag, his father, dissolving like mist. The first time he flew, that rush of impossible joy. Dumbledore's office, the whir of silver instruments, the old man's eyes twinkling with secrets that Harry had mistaken for wisdom. Sirius falling through the veil. Remus and Tonks, still and pale and dead and gone. Dobby in his arms on a cold beach. Fred's last laugh. All of it. Every shining, terrible, precious piece of his life, being stripped away and fed into the hungry runes on the floor. Harry screamed. He couldn't help it. He screamed until his throat shredded, and then he screamed silently, and then he stopped screaming because there wasn't enough of him left to scream. The last thing he saw, before the darkness took him, was Hermione's face. She was crying. She was crying and she hadn't stopped the ritual and she never would, because Hermione Granger had always been able to cry and still do terrible things, as long as she believed they were logical. Harry James Potter died on a Monday. The ministry would announce that the binding had been a success, and that Harry had been relocated for recovery. They would never find the body, because there was no body. The ritual had taken everything, magic, life force, soul, and when it was done, the chains held nothing but empty air and bloodstains. They would tell the public he was alive and well and resting comfortably. They would keep telling that lie for years, until it calcified into accepted truth, and Harry Potter became a name on a chocolate frog card and a chapter in a history book and nothing more. But Harry Potter was not nothing. And death, as it turned out, had opinions. Harry opened his eyes and saw stars. Not metaphorical stars, not the sparking lights of returning consciousness. Real stars. Thousands of them, millions, an ocean of light scattered across a darkness so vast and deep that it made the ministry dungeon look like a closet. He was floating, no, standing, on something that felt solid but looked like nothing, a transparent floor over an infinite abyss of starlight. "Well," said a voice. That was unpleasant to watch. Harry turned. He didn't panic, which surprised him. His body didn't hurt. His magic, he reached for it instinctively and found it there, all of it, blazing like a furnace in his chest, brighter and wilder than it had ever been. They'd tried to rip it out of him, but you can't steal something from a man after you've killed him. The magic had snapped back to him like a rubber band, and it had brought interest. The figure standing 10 feet away looked like nothing and everything. It shifted, sometimes a tall, gaunt silhouette in a hooded robe, sometimes a young woman with dark eyes, sometimes an old man leaning on a cane, sometimes just a presence, a weight in the air, the feeling of a door closing for the last time. "Death," Harry said. It wasn't a question. "Master," Death replied, and its voice was layered, a chorus, a whisper, a thunderclap, all at once. "We need to talk." Harry almost laughed. "Am I dead?" "Thoroughly. The ritual your former friends used was a bastardization of a soul-flaying curse crossed with a magical extraction array. Ingenious, honestly. MS. Granger always did have a gift for innovative cruelty disguised as progress." Death shifted, and for a moment it looked like a pale man in a dark suit, lounging in a chair that hadn't been there a second ago. "Your body was consumed. Your soul was meant to be consumed too, shredded and fed into their ward stones. But you're the master of death, Harry. You've held my hallows. You've walked through my veil and walked back out. Your soul doesn't shred that easily. I didn't feel very masterful down there in the chains. No. You felt very mortal. Very human. Very betrayed." Death leaned forward. "And I am angry about that." The stars trembled. Harry felt it in his bones, a vibration, a resonance, as if the fabric of reality itself had shuddered in response to Death's displeasure. "You're angry," Harry repeated slowly. "Furious." Death stood, or unfolded, or became taller, or simply occupied more space. "You are mine, Harry. Not in the way they wanted to own you, not as a tool, not as a weapon. You are mine the way the tide belongs to the moon. We are connected. You gathered my hallows, you accepted my gift, you walked my road and turned back, and in doing so, you became something singular. Something precious." The shifting stopped, and for one clear moment, Death looked like a person, dark-haired, sharp-featured, with eyes that were black from corner to corner. "They tortured you. They killed you. They tried to unmake you. And I take that personally." Harry stood in the starfield and felt something he hadn't felt in months. Not hope. Hope was a fragile thing, easily broken, and he was done with fragile things. What he felt was older than hope. Simpler. Heavier. He felt seen. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," Death said, "I give you a choice. Which is more than anyone else has ever given you." Death waved a hand, and the starfield shifted. Images formed in the darkness, shimmering, translucent, like memories projected on smoke. Option 1, you move on. The next great adventure, as a certain manipulative old man once called it. Rest. Peace. You've earned it more than any soul I've ever collected, and I've collected all of them. The image showed light, warm, golden, peaceful. Harry felt it pulling at him, gentle as a tide. Rest. No more pain. No more betrayal. No more chains. Option 2, Death continued, and the image shifted, you go back. Same world, same life, same people who destroyed you. I can put you back, and you can have your revenge. I'll even unshackle your magic fully, no more limits, no more restraints. You'd be the most powerful wizard alive. You could burn them all. The image showed the ministry in flames. Harry watched it and felt, nothing. Emptiness. The revenge fantasy of a broken man, and he was tired of being broken. Option 3. The third image was different. It wasn't golden light or righteous fire. It was a house, tall, Victorian, gloriously decrepit, looming against a gray sky like a crooked tooth. The gates were wrought iron, shaped into elaborate patterns that might have been decorative or might have been warding sigils. A family stood in front of it. A man, dark-haired, mustachioed, radiating manic energy even in a still image, his arm around a woman who looked like she'd been carved from moonlight and shadow. 2 children beside them, a boy, round-faced and cheerfully destructive, holding what appeared to be a stick of dynamite, and a girl. Harry stopped breathing. The girl was small and pale and dark-haired, and she stared out of the image with an expression of such absolute, uncompromising knowing that Harry felt pinned by it. She couldn't have been more than a few months old in this image, a baby, really, but her eyes were ancient. "The Addams family," Death said, and there was something in its voice that Harry had never heard before. Fondness. "Old friends of mine. Very old. The Addams line has walked beside Death since before your wizarding world existed. They don't fear me. They don't worship me. They simply appreciate me. They understand that darkness is not the opposite of love. That pain can be a gift. That death is not an ending." Death circled the image slowly. "Morticia is expecting twins. A boy and a girl. The girl will be born, she's already on her way, stubborn little thing. The boy." Death's expression shifted. Something almost like sadness. "The boy won't survive the birth. A cord around the neck. It happens. It would be natural, unremarkable, a small private tragedy." Harry understood. The realization came not as a thunderbolt but as a quiet settling, like snow filling footprints. "You want me to be their son. I want to give you a family," Death said simply. "A real one. Not people who keep you alive because you're useful. Not people who love the idea of you more than the reality. The Addamses love fiercely, completely, and without conditions. They love the dark parts too. Especially the dark parts." Death met Harry's eyes. "You would be born as their son. You would keep your memories, your magic, all of it. Unshackled. Unbound. Fused with the Addams family's own supernatural nature, which predates and exceeds anything your wizarding world understands. You would grow up loved, Harry. Truly loved. For exactly what you are." Harry's throat closed. He tried to speak and couldn't. He tried again. "What's the catch?" "No catch. A gift, freely given, from death to its master." Death paused. "Though I suspect your old world will come knocking eventually. It always does. And when it does, you'll be ready. Not because I made you ready. Because they will." Death gestured to the image of the family. "Because Gomez Addams will teach you that joy is a weapon. Because Morticia Addams will teach you that elegance and lethality are the same thing. Because Wednesday Addams," Death almost smiled, "will teach you that you never, ever have to be soft to survive." Harry looked at the image. The house. The family. The girl with the ancient eyes who would be his twin sister. He thought about golden light and peace and rest. He thought about fire and revenge and power. He thought about a baby boy who wouldn't survive the birth, and a family that would mourn him, and a space in the world shaped exactly like a child who was wanted. "Yes," Harry said. "Option 3. Please." Death smiled, and the stars went out, and Harry Potter fell through the dark into a new life. 16 years later, Harrison Addams woke to the sound of his sister sharpening a knife. This was not unusual. Wednesday sharpened her knives the way other people scrolled through their phones, absent-mindedly, meditatively, as a background activity while her formidable mind worked on something else. The rhythmic shhk of blade against whetstone had been the soundtrack of Harry's mornings for as long as he could remember, which was literally his entire existence, both lives included. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling of the car. They were in the back of the family's hearse, not being transported as corpses, though the Addamses wouldn't have found that objectionable, but because it was the family vehicle and it had excellent legroom. Lurch was driving, his massive frame hunched behind the wheel, navigating the winding New England roads with the careful precision of a man who had been dead at least once and didn't care to repeat the experience on anyone else's behalf. "You were dreaming again," Wednesday said. Harry turned his head. His twin sat beside him on the velvet bench seat, legs crossed, a bowie knife resting across her knee and a whetstone working methodically along its edge. She wore her Nevermore uniform already, black and gray, perfectly pressed, fitting her like she'd been designed for it or it had been designed for her. Her dark hair was in two tight braids. Her face was pale and composed and utterly without expression, which, if you knew Wednesday, meant she was concerned. "The dungeon won," Harry said. Not a question, she always knew. "You stopped breathing for 9 seconds. I timed it. New record." Pugsley's record is 14 seconds, but he was also actually being strangled at the time, so the comparison is imperfect. Wednesday tested the blade's edge against her thumb. A thin line of blood appeared. She studied it with clinical satisfaction and sheathed the knife. "Are you going to be insufferable about this, or can we move on?" Harry sat up and ran a hand through his hair. It was dark, Addams dark, black as a raven's wing, but his eyes were green. Startlingly, vividly green, the exact shade of a killing curse, which his mother Morticia had always found charming. He was lean and sharp-featured, with the angular Addams bone structure softened slightly by something else, something that belonged to another family, another life, another boy who had died in chains. "We can move on," he said. "Good. Because if you'd chosen insufferable, I was going to push you out of a moving vehicle, and Mother specifically asked me not to damage you before the first day of school." "She said that?" "She said, Wednesday, darling, try not to maim your brother before orientation. I consider that a narrow prohibition with significant room for creative interpretation." Harry grinned. It was a real grin, not the performance he'd worn in his first life, the brave hero's smile for the cameras, but the genuine article, sharp and dark and warm. Wednesday didn't smile back, because Wednesday's face didn't do that, but her eyes shifted a fraction of a degree, and Harry read it as clearly as if she'd laughed. The hearse crested a hill, and Nevermore Academy materialized through the trees like something out of a Gothic painting, all spires and dark stone and stained glass, perched on a hill above the town of Jericho, wrapped in grounds that were half manicured and half wild. Old trees, ancient ones, lined the drive. Harry felt their age through the glass, felt the roots tangled deep in earth that had been soaked in magic for centuries. And there it was. Beneath the surface, threaded through the school's foundations like veins through stone, wards. Layers of them. Some were outcast magic, wild and intuitive, the kind of power that came from blood and bone and belonging. But underneath those, older, more structured, geometric in their precision, wizard wards. Harry's eyes sharpened. He'd felt this before, the distinctive signature of wand-crafted enchantment, the mathematical elegance that distinguished wizarding magic from the raw, instinctive power of outcast communities. Someone, a wizard, or several, had helped build the foundations of Nevermore Academy. Or had helped hide it. Interesting. "You're doing it again," Wednesday said. "Doing what?" "Looking at the building like it's a puzzle box. Your left eyebrow twitches. It's deeply unattractive. You love my eyebrows. I tolerate your eyebrows. There's a critical difference." The hearse pulled through the gates and rolled to a stop in front of the main building. Lurch opened their door from outside. He'd exited the vehicle and circled it in the time it took them to gather their bags, which was either impressive speed or mild teleportation, and with Lurch you could never be sure. Harry stepped out and the wards washed over him like walking through a waterfall. He let them probe, let them read him, and felt them flinch. The school's magic touched his magic and recoiled, the way a house cat might sniff a wolf and back away slowly. Harry didn't suppress it. He didn't hide what he was. He was done hiding. The courtyard was chaos, students milling, parents hovering, trunks and suitcases being levitated or carried or in one case slithering under their own power. Harry saw scales, fur, the flash of inhuman eyes, a girl whose hair literally changed color as he watched. Outcasts. Werewolves, sirens, gorgons, psychics, shapeshifters, things with no clean category. A school for people who didn't fit anywhere else. Harry liked it immediately. Children. The voice came from behind them, rich and operatic and vibrating with emotion. Gomez Addams burst from the front passenger seat of the hearse like a man launched from a cannon, his pinstripe suit immaculate, his mustache quivering, his eyes already glistening. My children. My blood. My legacy. The fruit of my, Gomez, said Morticia, emerging from the passenger side with the unhurried grace of smoke rising from a candle. She was dressed entirely in black, her gown clinging to her like shadow, her dark hair falling straight and unbroken past her shoulders. She was, as always, the most beautiful thing in any room she entered, and her beauty was the kind that made people uneasy because it was too sharp, too perfect, too clearly connected to something dangerous. Let them breathe. Breathing is overrated, mi amor. I breathe only for you. Gomez seized Wednesday in a hug that she endured with the rigid tolerance of a cat being held by a toddler, then turned to Harry and gripped his shoulders, tears already streaming freely down his face. My son. My boy. Look at you. Standing on the precipice of education. Teetering on the brink of academia. Dangling over the chasm of, father. Yes. We'll be fine. Gomez's lower lip trembled. I know. I know you will. You'll be magnificent. You'll be terrifying. You'll make them weep with the sheer force of your presence. He pulled Harry into a hug so fierce it cracked something in Harry's spine, and Harry hugged him back just as hard, because Gomez Addams had never once in 16 years made Harry feel like a burden. Not once. Not for a single second. Morticia glided to them and placed one pale hand on Harry's cheek. Her touch was cool, always cool, like marble, like moonlight, and her dark eyes searched his face with the precise, unflinching attention of a woman who missed nothing. You had the dream again, she said. It wasn't a question. Morticia didn't ask questions she already knew the answers to. Wednesday already lectured me. Wednesday monitored your respiratory distress. That's not a lecture, that's surveillance. There's a difference. Morticia's thumb traced the line of his cheekbone. The past is a country you've already left, my darling. You carry its scars because scars are beautiful, they're proof of survival. But you don't carry its chains. Not anymore. Harry covered her hand with his own. I know, mother. If anyone in that school makes you feel otherwise, I want names. So you can, so I can handle it in whatever manner I deem appropriate. Your father keeps a very responsive legal team and an even more responsive collection of medieval weaponry. Gomez beamed. The mace alone is worth the insurance premiums. Wednesday materialized beside them. She'd already surveyed the courtyard, catalogued the exits, assessed the student body, and identified the most structurally vulnerable points of the building. Harry knew this because he'd done the same thing. The tall woman in the doorway has been watching us since we arrived, Wednesday said. She's trying very hard to look welcoming. It's failing. Harry followed her gaze. The woman in the doorway was statuesque, easily 6 feet tall, blonde, elegant in a severe way, wearing a white blazer over a dark dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. Her smile was professional and practiced and didn't reach her eyes. When her gaze met Harry's across the courtyard, he saw it, the flicker. The momentary widening. The instinctive, animal recognition that she was looking at something outside her experience. Principal Larissa Weems. Shapeshifter. He'd read her file, or rather, he'd pulled her name from the wards when they'd scanned him, because the wards knew who their mistress was, and Harry's magic had asked politely. She can sense it, Harry told Wednesday. My magic. Hers is reacting. How unfortunate for her. The Addamses crossed the courtyard like a funeral procession. Students parted for them without being asked, instinct, probably, the same instinct that makes rabbits freeze when a hawk's shadow passes overhead. Gomez walked like he owned the world and was generously allowing others to live in it. Morticia moved like gravity was a suggestion she occasionally entertained. Wednesday walked like she was going to war. And Harry walked like he'd already been to war and won, and lost, and died, and come back, and would do all of it again if necessary. Mr. and Mrs. Addams. Weems extended a hand. Her smile was firmly in place. Welcome to Nevermore. We're thrilled to have Wednesday and Harrison joining us this semester. The thrill is entirely yours, I'm sure, Morticia said, taking Weems's hand briefly. Our children are unique. Every student at Nevermore is unique, Mrs. Addams. That's rather the point. No, Gomez said cheerfully. You misunderstand. We mean actually unique. Profoundly. Perhaps dangerously. There is no precedent for what our children are. He said this with the pride of a man showing off a prize-winning horse, if the horse could also breathe fire and recite poetry. Weems's smile flickered. Well. We do enjoy a challenge. Let me show you inside. The tour was unnecessary, Harry had already mapped the building through the wards, but he allowed it because Morticia had taught him that politeness was a weapon, and you should always let people feel in control until the moment you needed them not to be. Nevermore was beautiful in the way old things are beautiful, layered, scarred, full of memory. Harry ran his fingers along the stone walls as they walked and felt centuries of magic humming under his touch. Outcast magic, rich and wild, full of emotion and instinct. And underneath it, quiet and structured and deliberately hidden, the wizard wards. Old ones. Founder-era old, if he had to guess. Someone had wrapped this school in concealment charms so powerful that the entire international wizarding community had overlooked its existence for centuries. Why would a wizarding world that had systematically ignored and marginalized outcasts bother to hide their school? Unless they weren't hiding the school from the world. Unless they were hiding the world from the school. Harry filed the thought away and kept walking. Weems led them to the dormitory wing. Wednesday, you'll be rooming with Enid Sinclair, she's one of our most spirited students, I require a single room, Wednesday said. We don't offer single rooms to new students. Then I require a roommate with a high tolerance for nocturnal cello practice, casual taxidermy, and the occasional controlled fire. Weems blinked. Enid it is, then. And Harrison, you'll be in the East Wing, room 213. You'll be sharing with Xavier Thorpe. Harry nodded. He didn't particularly care about roommates. He'd slept in a cupboard, a dormitory, and a dungeon. A shared room with a stranger was practically luxury. They said their goodbyes in the main hall. Gomez wept openly and at length. Morticia embraced each twin separately, Wednesday with a kiss to the forehead, Harry with both hands on his face and a look that said I see you, all of you, every broken piece and every sharp edge, and I love every single one of them. Protect each other, she said. Always, Harry and Wednesday said together, and it wasn't coordinated, wasn't rehearsed. It was just true. The hearse pulled away. Lurch honked once, a mournful, resonant sound like a foghorn, and the Addams parents were gone, and Harry and Wednesday stood in the entrance hall of Nevermore Academy, and something in the building's bones shivered. Right then, Harry said. Shall we? Wednesday adjusted her bag on her shoulder. Try not to traumatize anyone on the first day. I make no promises. I know. That's why I said try. They split at the staircase, Wednesday going right toward her wing, Harry going left toward his. The corridors were busy with arriving students, and Harry moved through them like a blade through water, not touching anyone, not jostled, not bumped. People moved out of his way without realizing they were doing it. His magic preceded him like a bow wave, not aggressive, not threatening, just present, so undeniably, overwhelmingly present that it rearranged the space around him. Room 213 was at the end of the hall. The door was open. Inside, a boy sat on one of the two beds, sketch pad on his knee, pencil moving in fast, sure strokes. He was tall, dark-haired, with the kind of face that probably launched 1,000 crushes, sharp jaw, artist's hands, eyes that held something guarded and watchful. Xavier Thorpe looked up when Harry entered, and his pencil stopped. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Xavier was staring, not rudely, but with the fixed, slightly unfocused intensity of someone whose psychic abilities were firing on all cylinders without his permission. "You're Harrison Addams," Xavier said finally. "Harry." "Right. Xavier. Thorpe." He paused. Do you always feel like that?" "Like what?" "Like standing next to a bonfire. Except the bonfire is also somehow looking at me." Xavier shook his head slightly, as if clearing it. "Sorry. That's a weird thing to say to someone you just met." "I've heard weirder." Harry set his bag on the empty bed. It was a simple leather duffel, Thing had packed it, which meant everything inside was immaculately organized and also probably contained at least one item that was technically a weapon. "Psychic?" "Yeah. You. Complicated." Xavier almost smiled. "Mysterious. Great. Love that in a roommate." Harry liked him. Cautiously, provisionally, in the way he liked anyone, but Xavier had a sharpness to him that was genuine, not performed, and his wariness was the healthy kind, the kind that came from seeing things other people couldn't, not the paranoid kind that came from treachery. "Fair enough," Xavier said, returning to his sketch. Then he stopped. Looked down at his pad. His face did something complicated. "What?" Harry asked. Xavier turned the sketch pad around. It was a portrait, dark hair, green eyes, angular features. Harry's face. But Xavier had been drawing it before Harry walked in. The page was half full, the pencil lines layered and sure, at least 20 minutes of work. "I've been drawing you all morning," Xavier said quietly. "Before I knew who you were. Before I knew you existed. My hand just started." He looked up at Harry. "That's never happened before. Not with a person." Harry studied the drawing. It was good, more than good. Xavier had captured something in the set of the jaw, the weight in the eyes, that a photograph would have missed. It wasn't just a face. It was a warning. "Keep it," Harry said. "Might come in handy." He unpacked in silence while Xavier sketched, and the room filled with the kind of quiet that exists between two people who are both very good at observing and have decided to observe each other from a safe distance. The afternoon was orientation, welcome speeches, campus tours, social mixers that Wednesday attended with the enthusiasm of someone being led to their own execution. Harry found her at the back of the main hall during Principal Weems's address, standing like a shadow against the wall. "My roommate is aggressively cheerful," Wednesday reported. "She has a blog about werewolf fashion. She tried to hug me. I may have threatened to remove her spleen." "How'd she take it?" "She said, 'OMG, you're so funny,' and tried to hug me again. I respect her perseverance if not her survival instincts." Weems was wrapping up her speech, something about community, belonging, the Nevermore tradition. Harry wasn't listening. He was watching the students, reading the room. Social clusters had already formed, constellations of power and allegiance. The sirens held court near the front, Bianca Barkley at their center, dark-haired and commanding, her voice carrying a faint musical resonance even in normal speech. The werewolf pack clustered near the doors. The psychics and seers scattered throughout, most of them looking mildly uncomfortable, as psychics in crowded rooms tended to. And then there were the ones who didn't fit any cluster. The loners, the oddities, the outcasts among the outcasts. Harry saw a boy sitting alone in the back row, brown-haired, quiet-faced, wearing a Jericho high sweatshirt instead of a Nevermore uniform. Human. Or presenting as human. His eyes kept drifting to the exits, and his hands were clenched in his lap, and something about him made Harry's magic hum a low, discordant note. The boy in the back, Harry murmured to Wednesday. Jericho sweatshirt. Tyler Galpin. Sheriff's son. Barista at the local coffee shop. Ostensibly normal. Wednesday's gaze was sharp and flat and missed nothing. He shouldn't be at orientation. This is for enrolled students. Maybe he's curious. Maybe. Or maybe he's looking for something. The speeches ended. Students mingled. Harry moved through the crowd with Wednesday at his side, and together they projected an aura of such concentrated, do-not-approach energy that most students gave them a wide berth. Most. You're the Addams twins. Bianca Barkley materialized in front of them like she'd been waiting for exactly the right moment to strike, which she probably had. She was beautiful, objectively, undeniably, in the way that sirens were always beautiful, their features tuned to some frequency that bypassed conscious thought and went straight to the hindbrain. Her voice carried undertones, harmonics that most people wouldn't notice consciously but would respond to anyway, a gentle nudge toward trust, toward compliance, toward the desire to please. Harry felt it wash over him like a breeze over a mountain. He didn't block it, there was nothing to block. Siren magic operated on emotional resonance, and Harry's emotional landscape was a fortress. Not because he didn't feel, he felt enormously, devastating amounts, but because his feelings were his, defended by 16 years of love and magic and the unshakable knowledge of what it meant to have your inner world invaded by people who didn't deserve access to it. Wednesday wasn't affected either, but that was because Wednesday's emotional frequency was somewhere outside the range of conventional influence. You couldn't manipulate feelings that operated on an entirely different wavelength. You must be Bianca, Harry said. Your reputation precedes you. Bianca's smile was sharp and practiced. So does yours. The Addams family. Old money, older blood, rumored to be. She waved a hand vaguely. Everything from vampires to demons to something nobody has a name for. We prefer Addams, Wednesday said. It covers everything. Bianca's attention focused on Harry, and he felt her push, a slight increase in the siren resonance, just enough to tip a normal interaction from casual to compliant. I run the social committee. I like to welcome all the new students personally. Make sure they know how things work here. How things work, Harry repeated mildly. Nevermore has traditions. Hierarchies. Ways of doing things. The faster new students understand that, the smoother their experience. Another push, stronger this time. Not aggressive, Bianca was too sophisticated for a blunt force approach, but unmistakable. I'd love to give you both a proper orientation. Show you the ropes. Make sure you're comfortable. Make sure we're manageable, you mean. Bianca's smile flickered. The siren resonance hit Harry a third time, and this time it was real pressure, a focused attempt to create rapport, to establish influence, to make him want to cooperate. Harry looked at her. Just looked. And in his eyes, green as killing curses, something shifted, a depth, a darkness, a weight that had nothing to do with teenage social dynamics and everything to do with what he actually was. The siren song broke. Not slowly, not gradually. It shattered. Like glass hitting stone, like a wave striking a cliff, like something living encountering something vast and old and absolute. Bianca's influence didn't just fail to affect Harry, it collapsed entirely, the resonance dissipating in a radius around him, and every student within 10 feet suddenly blinked and shook their heads like they'd just woken up from a light doze. Bianca's composed expression cracked. She felt it, of course she felt it, it was her power, her identity, the core of what she was, and for one unguarded moment, Harry saw fear in her eyes. "I appreciate the welcome," Harry said, and his voice was warm and genuine and completely untouched by anything she'd attempted. "But we'll find our own way. We usually do." He walked away. Wednesday fell into step beside him. Behind them, Bianca Barkley stood very still, surrounded by students who were rubbing their eyes and looking confused, and tried to understand what had just happened to her. "You broke her hold on the entire room," Wednesday observed. "It wasn't intentional. Wasn't it?" Harry considered. "No. It was passive. My magic just doesn't accept external influence. Anything that tries to get in gets reflected back. Forcefully. I didn't design the system, Wednesday. I just live in it." Wednesday made a sound that might, in another person, have been a laugh. From her, it was more like a click of acknowledgement, a brief opening and closing of approval. They explored the campus as the sun fell toward the horizon. Nevermore's grounds were extensive, forests to the north, a lake to the east, the town of Jericho visible in the valley below. Harry walked with his hands in his pockets, and with every step, his magic read the earth beneath him. Old ground. Soaked in decades of outcast energy, wild and layered, power bleeding into the soil like roots. And underneath that, the wizard wards. He kept coming back to them. They were masterful, woven so deeply into the foundation that they'd become part of the structure, indistinguishable from the natural magic of the place unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. Concealment charms, primarily, massive ones, industrial grade, designed to make an entire location invisible to magical detection. But also containment wards. Not to keep things out. To keep things in. Wednesday. She was ahead of him on the path, near the tree line, standing motionless. Not unusual, Wednesday often stopped to contemplate things. But her stillness had a different quality now. Tighter. More focused. Wednesday. She turned. Her face was the same carved mask it always was, but her eyes, "I just had a vision," she said. "Someone is going to die here. Someone is going to die here horribly." And something in the forest, she stopped. Looked at the tree lean. The shadows between the trunks were deeper than they should have been, pooling like ink, and somewhere in their depths, something moved. Not an animal. Something larger. Something wrong. Harry's magic surged. Not defensively, offensively. It roared up through him like a wave, and the air around him crackled, and for just a moment the ground beneath his feet hummed with a resonance that made the nearest trees shudder. The thing in the forest stopped. Harry felt it, a consciousness, primitive and hungry, touching the edge of his magic and recoiling like a hand from a hot stove. Whatever it was smart enough to be afraid. It retreated. The shadows normalized. The forest was just a forest again. Wednesday stared at the trees for a long moment, then at Harry. "Well," she said. "This semester is going to be interesting." Night fell on Nevermore like a curtain dropping. Harry left Wednesday at her dormitory. Enid Sinclair was audible through the door, explaining her color-coding system at enthusiastic volume, and walked back to his own wing. Xavier was asleep when he entered, the sketch pad on the nightstand still open to Harry's face. Harry stood at the window and looked out over the grounds. The school was quiet. Moonlight turned the stone buildings silver. The forest was a dark mass on the northern edge, and beyond it, mountains. Below, the town of Jericho glimmered, small, sleepy, human. Unaware of the school on the hill and the things it contained. Harry pressed his palm flat against the window glass and reached out with his magic. Not looking for anything specific, just listening. Feeling. Reading. The words hummed against his touch. The outcast magic was warm, communal, a chorus of different powers singing in approximate harmony. The wizard words were cold and precise, mathematical, like the ticking of an old clock. And beneath both layers, deeper than anyone had built or intended, something else entirely. Something old. Something that had been here before the school, before the wards, before the town. Something in the earth itself, sleeping fitfully, dreaming in a language Harry could almost understand. He pulled his hand back. On the nightstand, his phone buzzed. A text from Wednesday. Can't sleep. Enid is describing her skin care routine. I'm considering homicide. Harry smiled. Give her a chance. She survived the hug threat. That shows character. Character is not a defense against boredom. Patience, sister mine. Patience is a virtue. I don't have those. Harry pocketed his phone and turned back to the window. Out there, in the dark, something was hunting. The wizarding world had left fingerprints on this school's foundations. His sister was having visions of death. And a presence in the forest had been smart enough to run from him. In his first life, not the danger, Harry had never been afraid of danger, but the weight of it. The certainty that he would be expected to fix it, to sacrifice for it, to pour himself into the breach and be consumed. But that was Harry Potter. Harry Potter was dead. He'd died in chains in a dungeon, and the people he'd loved had watched. Harrison Addams stood at the window of Nevermore Academy and felt the darkness press against the glass, and he didn't flinch, didn't worry, didn't feel the old familiar weight of unwanted destiny settling on his shoulders. He felt curious. He felt ready. And somewhere far away, in a ministry building in London, a magical signature monitor that hadn't activated in 16 years suddenly began to glow. A technician blinked at it, ran the reading twice, and then picked up the phone to call her supervisor. The reading was impossible. The wizard it belonged to was dead, confirmed dead, officially dead, legally and magically dead. The signature should not exist. But it was there. Blazing like a bonfire on the detection grid. Brighter than any living wizard in Britain. Brighter than any wizard they'd ever recorded. The technician's hands shook as she dialed. Ma'am. It's Henderson, in monitoring. You need to come see this. Ma'am, it's Potter. Harry Potter. He's alive. 6,000 miles away, Harry Addams turned from the window, got into bed, and slept without dreaming. Tomorrow, Nevermore would learn what an Addams could do. He couldn't wait. Chapter 2, Outcasts Among Outcasts. Harry woke at 5 in the morning because his body had never learned to sleep late. 16 years as an Addams had given him many things, a family, a name, a sense of self that the old world had never allowed, but it hadn't cured the habit of rising before dawn. Some part of him still expected the rap of knuckles on a cupboard door, the shrill demand to start breakfast. That boy was dead, but his rhythms lingered like a phantom limb. Xavier was still asleep, sprawled diagonally across his bed in a way that suggested his subconscious had no respect for geometry. His sketch pad had fallen open on the floor during the night, and Harry glanced at it as he stepped over it on his way to the bathroom. More drawings of him. 3 new ones, done in what looked like a fugue, the pencil lines jagged, pressured, almost frantic. One showed Harry from behind, standing in front of something massive and dark that the sketch only hinted at. Another was just his eyes, filling the entire page, with something moving in their depths. The third was Harry and Wednesday side by side, and behind them, stretched out like wings, shadows that didn't match their bodies. Xavier's psychic gift was strong. Stronger than the boy probably realized. Harry showered, dressed in his Nevermore uniform, which he'd modified slightly by refusing to wear the tie, because an Addams accessorized on his own terms, and left the room while Xavier slept on. The hallways were empty at this hour, grey pre-dawn light filtering through the tall windows, and Harry walked them slowly, trailing his fingers along the walls, reading the school like Braille. Every stone had a story. He could feel the layers, decades of students, their magic soaked into the building like perfume into fabric. Joy, fear, ambition, loneliness, first loves and bitter rivalries, and the quiet midnight desperation of teenagers who didn't fit anywhere else. Nevermore had absorbed it all, and it hummed with a composite energy that was chaotic and warm and deeply, fundamentally alive. And beneath it, always beneath it, the wizard wards. Harry stopped at a junction where two corridors met. Here, the ward structure was denser, a nexus point, a knot where multiple lines of enchantment converged. He placed his palm flat against the stone and pushed his magic into it, not aggressively but inquisitively, the way you might tap on a wall to find a hollow space. The wards resisted. They were old and stubborn and set by someone who knew what they were doing. But Harry's magic wasn't the blunt instrument of a wand waver, it was something else now, something that had been reforged in death and reborn in the Addams bloodline, a fusion of wizarding precision and the ancient, primal power that ran through his family like an underground river. He didn't force the wards. He listened to them. Found their frequency. Matched it. And slipped through like water through a crack. Information flooded in. The concealment matrix was enormous, a hemisphere of interlocking charms centered on the school, extending 3 miles in every direction. Its primary function was to make Nevermore undetectable to wizarding means of magical surveillance. Scrying, tracking spells, magical satellite arrays, all of it would slide off this place like rain off glass. The school existed in a blind spot, carefully and deliberately engineered. The caster's signature was old. Very old. And buried deep, deliberately obscured, but not well enough. Harry teased it out, strand by strand, and felt the shape of it, male, powerful, eccentric, with a distinctive magical thumbprint that combined precision with a certain theatrical flourish. Harry's hand jerked back from the wall. He knew that signature. He'd felt it 1,000 times in his first life, in the headmaster's office, in the protective enchantments around Privet Drive, in the very fabric of Hogwarts itself. Albus Dumbledore had built these wards. Harry stood very still in the grey corridor and let that information settle. Dumbledore had known about Nevermore. Dumbledore had helped conceal it from the wizarding world. Why? Altruism? Harry didn't believe that for a second, not anymore, not after what he'd learned about the old man's long game of manipulation and control. Dumbledore didn't do things out of kindness. He did things because they served a purpose that only he could see, and if that purpose happened to look like kindness, all the better for his reputation. So what purpose did hiding an outcast school serve? Harry filed it away. The mystery could wait. But it wouldn't wait forever. He found the dining hall by following the smell of coffee and the sound of early risers. Nevermore's cafeteria was a grand room, high ceilings, dark wood, stained glass windows depicting what appeared to be significant moments in outcast history. Long tables ran the length of the room, and students were scattered across them in the loose, bleary constellations of people who hadn't fully woken up yet. Harry got coffee, black, strong, the way Morticia drank it, and found a table in the corner. He sat with his back to the wall, facing the room, because some habits from his first life were survival instincts and he wasn't interested in unlearning them. Wednesday appeared at 6:30, precise as a clock. She'd clearly been awake for some time, her braids were immaculate, her uniform pristine, and she carried with her the faint scent of whatever arcane chemicals she used for her morning taxidermy practice. She sat across from Harry without greeting, took his coffee, drank from it, set it back down, and said, "Enid snores." Not aggressively. More of a gentle, persistent whistling, like a teakettle slowly losing the will to live. "You'll adapt. Adaptation implies acceptance. I'm still in the assessment phase." Wednesday pulled a notebook from her bag, black leather, unlined, the pages already half full of her sharp, angular handwriting. I had another vision last night. Clearer this time. Harry leaned forward. Wednesday's visions were rare and never trivial. They came through her like lightning through a rod, violent, involuntary, and always true, though the truth they showed was often fragmented, requiring interpretation. The same one. Death in the forest. Expanded. I saw a body, a student, I think, though the face was unclear. Torn apart. Not by claws or teeth, though those were present. There was something else. A kind of dissolution. As if the flesh was being unmade at a molecular level. Wednesday's voice was clinical, detached. She could have been describing a lab experiment. And I felt something behind it. A will. Not the creature's will, something else, something human, directing it. Whoever this monster is, it's on a leash. I felt the same thing last night. The presence in the forest, it retreated the moment it sensed my magic. That's not predator behavior. Predators test boundaries. This thing obeyed. It pulled back because something told it to, or because it was conditioned to avoid anything more powerful than itself. A hide, Wednesday said. Harry looked at her sharply. You're sure? Not yet. But the pattern fits. Hides are psychogenic shapeshifters, they transform under the influence of extreme emotional triggers, and their shifted state is capable of enormous physical destruction. They're rare, poorly documented, and historically used as weapons by people who are smart enough to identify and activate the trigger. Wednesday tapped her pen against the notebook. If someone at Nevermore has a dormant hide gene and someone else has found a way to activate it remotely, that explains the controlled predatory behavior. The hide kills what it's told to kill. And the dissolution I assume you saw, that's consistent with what I felt on the magical residue level. The thing in the forest carries dark magic. Not outcast-type magic. Wizard magic. Their eyes met across the table. The same thought, arriving simultaneously, because they were twins and their minds ran on parallel tracks that converged at the important moments. Someone is using wizarding dark magic to control an outcast weapon, Wednesday said. At a school that was hidden from the wizarding world by Albus Dumbledore. Well. That's not ominous at all. The dining hall was filling up. Students streamed in, and the noise level rose, and the early morning silence gave way to the clatter of plates and the buzz of conversation. Harry watched them, all these outcasts, these kids who didn't fit, who'd been sent here because the normal world didn't have room for what they were, and felt a complicated tightness in his chest. In his first life, he'd gone to a school like this. A school for people with powers the normal world couldn't accept. And that school had been a hunting ground too, basilisks in the walls, Death Eaters at the gates, a war creeping closer every year while the adults pretended everything was fine. He'd lost friends there. He'd lost his childhood there. He would not let it happen again. Not here. Not to these people who had nothing to do with his old wars. A tray clattered down beside Wednesday, and a blur of color and enthusiasm crashed into the seat next to her. Morning. Oh my God, you're already here, I looked everywhere for you, well, not everywhere, I checked the room first and you were already gone and I was like, she's such an early riser, that's so cool, I'm usually more of a 9 a.m. minimum person but today I was excited because first day of classes and also I wanted to introduce you to people. Enid Sinclair was a force of nature. Blonde, bright-eyed, dressed in a Nevermore uniform that she'd somehow made look cheerful through the addition of colorful pins and a pair of sneakers that were either custom-painted or the victim of an art supply explosion. She radiated warmth the way a space heater radiated warmth, indiscriminately, overwhelmingly, impossible to ignore. Enid, Wednesday said. You're sitting very close to me. Sorry. Personal space, right, you mentioned that. Well, you said, if you touch me again I'll harvest your organs, which I'm choosing to interpret as a boundary-setting exercise. Enid's attention swung to Harry, and her eyes widened. Oh. You're Wednesday's brother. The twin. Hi. I'm Enid. She's told me literally nothing about you, which honestly tracks. Harry, he said, and despite himself, despite everything, he felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Enid Sinclair was ridiculous. She was also, he suspected, tougher than she looked. You didn't survive as a werewolf without some steel under the sunshine. She told me you tried to hug her. Twice. And I'm going for a third attempt later today. I have a system. I admire your commitment to a losing strategy. That's what my pack alpha says about my whole personality, so I'm used to it. Enid grinned, and it was the kind of grin that dared you not to smile back. Harry held out for 3 seconds, then gave in. Wednesday observed this exchange with an expression of perfect blankness that Harry read as grudging fascination. The first class was Outcast History, taught by a woman named Ms. Thornhill, who looked nothing like what Harry expected. She was young, late 20s, maybe early 30s, with red hair and a warm, approachable manner and the kind of face that made people trust her instinctively. She wore a botanical print dress under her academic robes and had potted plants on every available surface of her classroom. Harry didn't trust her instinctively. He didn't trust anyone instinctively, not anymore, but there was something specific about Thornhill that put his senses on edge. Not her manner, that was flawless, genuinely passionate about her subject, engaging with students in a way that felt authentic. It was her magic. Or rather, her lack of it. She had no outcast signature. None. In a school where every person, student, teacher, staff, radiated some form of supernatural energy, Marilyn Thornhill was a blank. A void. She read as purely, perfectly, completely human. Which was impossible, because Nevermore didn't hire humans. It was in the charter. Either she was supernaturally gifted at concealment, or she was something else wearing a very good disguise. Harry didn't probe, not here, not in a crowded classroom, but he let his passive senses wash over her, and what they found was a wall. Smooth, featureless, impenetrable. Not the natural blankness of a non-magical person, but the deliberate, constructed blankness of someone who had built a shell around themselves and polished it until it reflected nothing. Harry had seen concealment like that before. In his first life. It was wizard-grade occlumency, adapted and externalized. Someone had taught this woman to hide her true nature using techniques that originated in the magical world. Another thread. Another connection. He tucked it away and focused on the class. Thornhill was lecturing about the founding of Nevermore, established in the 1700s as a haven for outcasts fleeing persecution. The early outcast communities had no centralized protection, she said, writing dates on the board with enthusiastic chalk strokes. They were scattered, vulnerable, picked off by witch hunters and hostile normie communities. Nevermore was one of the first attempts to create a permanent, protected space. The founders laid the groundwork for everything we have today. Who were the founders? Harry asked. Thornhill turned, surprised. New students didn't usually engage in the first 5 minutes. The historical record names 4 outcast families, the Crackstones, the Nightshades, the Munsters, and the Thorpes. They pooled their resources and their power to establish the school and its protections. Just outcast families? Something flickered behind Thornhill's warm expression. Quick as a blink and twice as subtle, but Harry caught it, a flash of something sharp and calculating before the warmth reasserted itself. As far as the records show, yes. Why do you ask? Curious. The school's protections feel layered. Like more than one tradition was involved in creating them. The classroom had gone quiet. Students were watching, sensing the subtle tension in the exchange without understanding its source. Wednesday, seated 2 rows back, had her pen poised over her notebook and her eyes fixed on Thornhill with the unblinking focus of a cobra tracking movement. Thornhill smiled. You're perceptive, Harrison. Nevermore's wards have been added to and modified over centuries by many different practitioners. It's natural that they'd feel eclectic. She turned back to the board, and the moment passed, and the lecture continued. But Harry had seen what he needed to see. Thornhill knew about the wizard wards. She knew, and she deflected the question, and the deflection had been smooth enough that anyone less observant would have accepted it without a second thought. After class, Wednesday fell into step with him in the corridor. Thornhill is hiding something. At least one something. Possibly several. I'll investigate. You focus on the wards. Since when do you give the orders? Since always. You just don't usually notice because I make them sound like suggestions. The next class was conflict resolution, which turned out to be a polite name for combat training. The instructor was a broad-shouldered woman with scars on her forearms and the no-nonsense energy of someone who had spent her career dealing with supernaturally powered teenagers and their drama. Welcome to your least favorite class, she said, standing in the center of a gymnasium that had been converted into a training space, mats on the floor, wards on the walls to contain stray powers. I'm Coach Santiago. The rules are simple, no killing, no permanent maiming, and if I say stop, you stop. Everything else is negotiable. She looked at the assembled students. Who wants to go first? Nobody volunteered. Santiago's gaze swept the room and landed on Harry, who was standing near the back with his hands in his pockets, radiating the particular kind of stillness that experienced fighters recognized as dangerous. New kid. Addams. You look comfortable. I've had practice. Show me. Get on the mat. She pointed to a student on the other side of the room. Rowan. You too. Rowan was a telekinetic. Harry could feel the buzz of his power from across the room, unfocused and jittery, the signature of someone with more ability than control. He was thin, nervous, and clearly did not want to be on the mat with someone whose magical presence made the wards hum. I don't think this is a good idea, Rowan said. It's not meant to be a good idea, Santiago said. It's meant to be educational. Standard rules. Begin when ready. Rowan moved first. A telekinetic shove, blunt, forceful, the equivalent of throwing a table. Harry felt it coming from the moment Rowan's power coiled, and he simply wasn't where the shove landed. He sidestepped, casual as breathing, and the wave of force cracked the mat behind him. Rowan tried again. A focused push this time, targeted at Harry's chest. Harry raised one hand and the telekinetic force split around him like a stream around a stone. He didn't redirect it, didn't counter it, he just let it pass. His magic absorbed the kinetic energy, converted it into heat, and dissipated it through the floor. The mat under his feet warmed slightly. You can hit me, Harry said. Not mocking. Genuinely encouraging. You're telegraphing. Your power coils to the left before you push. Try keeping it centered. Rowan stared at him. Then, with the reckless determination of someone who'd been given permission to swing, he attacked in earnest. 3 quick strikes, left, right, overhead, telekinetic force hitting like invisible fists. Harry moved through them like water, redirecting here, absorbing there, not attacking, not retaliating, just showing Rowan what a controlled defense looked like. On the 4th strike, Harry stepped forward instead of sideways. He closed the distance between them in a single smooth motion, placed one hand on Rowan's shoulder, and grounded the telekinetic's power. It was gentle. Harry pushed his own magic through the contact point and created a dampening field, not suppressing Rowan's ability but calming it, the way you'd soothe a spooked horse. Rowan gasped. What did you? Your power is reactive. It spikes when you're nervous, which makes you more nervous, which makes it spike more. It's a feedback loop. Harry removed his hand. Breathe from your center. Let the power settle before you direct it. The gymnasium was very quiet. Santiago was watching with the expression of someone who'd just seen a first-year student do something she couldn't. The other students were staring. Bianca Barkley, standing near the wall with her siren entourage, had her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. "Well," Santiago said after a beat. "Addams, you want to tell me where you learned to fight like that?" "Family tradition." "Right. Addams' family." Santiago shook her head. "Anyone else want to turn with him?" Nobody moved. "I'll go," said a voice from the back. The crowd parted, and Bianca Barkley walked onto the mat. She'd changed into training clothes, fitted, practical, designed for movement. Her hair was pulled back, and without the social armor of her school uniform and her entourage, she looked different. Harder. More real. Her eyes were locked on Harry with an intensity that had nothing to do with siren manipulation and everything to do with personal pride. "You embarrassed me yesterday," Bianca said, low enough that only Harry could hear. "That wasn't my intention." "I know. That makes it worse. You didn't even try, it was just passive. Like I wasn't worth the effort of a deliberate defense." She settled into a fighting stance, and Harry recognized training, formal, precise. Someone had taught her to fight without relying on her siren voice. "So let's do this properly. No powers. No magic. Just skill." Harry studied her for a moment. Then he took his hands out of his pockets, rolled his shoulders, and matched her stance. "Whenever you're ready." Bianca was good. Better than good, she was trained, disciplined, fast. She came at Harry with a combination that would have floored most opponents, a feint to the left, a spinning kick to the right, followed by an elbow strike that targeted the solar plexus. It was clean, efficient, brutal. Harry blocked the kick with his forearm, redirected the elbow, and countered with a sweep that Bianca leaped over with the grace of a dancer. They separated, circled, came together again. Strike, block, counter, retreat. It was fast and precise and almost beautiful, and the students watching had stopped breathing. Bianca was fighting with everything she had, not just physical skill, but the focused, burning need to prove that she was more than her power, more than the girl whose influence Harry had shattered like glass. Every strike was a statement. Every combination was an argument. She was saying, "I am not just a voice, I am not just manipulation, I am a weapon in my own right," and Harry heard her. He heard her, and he respected her, so he stopped holding back. Not his magic, he kept that contained, honoring the terms she'd set. But his physical skill, the product of 2 lifetimes of combat, one lived as a child soldier in a wizard war, one spent training with Gomez Addams, who fenced like a man possessed and fought like a man who believed every battle was a love letter to violence. Harry moved inside Bianca's guard so fast she didn't register the shift until he was already there. He caught her next strike at the wrist, redirected her momentum, and put her on the mat with a controlled takedown that was gentle enough to avoid injury and decisive enough to be undeniable. His hand pressed against her shoulder, holding her down, and his face was close to hers, and for a moment neither of them moved. "You're good," Harry said. "Really good. Your form is excellent, your speed is outstanding, and your combinations are creative. You fight like someone who's been told her whole life that her voice is her only weapon and decided to prove everyone wrong." Bianca stared up at him, breathing hard, her eyes wide with something that wasn't anger and wasn't fear and wasn't quite respect but was heading in that direction. "I wasn't trying to embarrass you yesterday," Harry continued. "My magic is reflexive, it protects me whether I want it to or not. I can't turn it off any more than you can turn off your voice. The difference is, I don't use mine to manipulate people." He released her shoulder and offered his hand. "So maybe we can start over." Bianca looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she took it, and Harry pulled her to her feet and something shifted between them, not friendship, not yet, but the grudging recognition of equals. "You fight like you've been doing it since you could walk," Bianca said, straightening her training clothes. Since before, Harry said, and he meant it in a way she couldn't understand. Santiago ended the class shortly after that. Nobody else wanted the mat. Harry walked out of the gymnasium with Wednesday, who had watched the entire session from the bleachers without expression. "You were showing off," she said. "I was engaging with the curriculum." "You were showing off." The wrist catch was unnecessary. You could have ended it 3 moves earlier. Bianca needed the extra time. She needed to feel like she'd been beaten by someone who took her seriously, not someone who dismissed her. Wednesday was quiet for a few steps. That's either very perceptive or very arrogant. Why not both? The afternoon brought the Po Cup announcement, and with it, the first real social event of the semester. Weems announced it at lunch, a long-standing Nevermore tradition, a multi-team race across the school's lake, combining physical skill, supernatural ability, and strategy. Mandatory participation for all students. Teams of 8. The Po Cup is more than a race, Weems said from the podium, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone who'd given this speech many times. It's a celebration of what makes Nevermore special, our diversity, our talents, our ability to work together despite our differences. It's a popularity contest with boats, Wednesday murmured. Cynical. Accurate. The teams formed quickly. Bianca's siren-led faction claimed the best boat immediately, social hierarchy in action, the popular kids consolidating power. The werewolf pack formed their own team, Enid bouncing among them with infectious energy. Xavier drifted toward a group of psychics and artists who seemed to coalesce more out of mutual oddity than actual strategy. Wednesday and Harry were left with the rejects, the students nobody else wanted. A Gorgon girl named Divina who seemed terrified of her own power. A shapeshifter named Kent who could only manage partial transformations. A telekinetic, Rowan, who gravitated toward Harry after the gym session with the loyalty of a stray dog who'd been fed. 2 students whose abilities Harry couldn't immediately categorize, and a small, furious girl named Yoko who was a vampire and apparently held grudges against the Siren faction for reasons she explained at length. "We're going to lose," Yoko said flatly, looking at their assembled team. "No offense, but this is the island of misfit toys." "We're not going to lose," Harry said. "Have you seen Bianca's team? They've won the Po Cup 6 years running. They've got 2 sirens, a telekinetic who can bench press a truck with his brain, and their boat is, 'We're not going to lose,'" Harry repeated, and something in his voice made Yoko stop talking. Not compulsion, Harry would never do that. Just certainty. The absolute, unshakable certainty of someone who had faced things that made a school boat race look like a warm-up exercise and had come out the other side. Wednesday looked at their team. Then at Harry. Then at their team again. "You have a plan." "I always have a plan." "Your plans tend to involve excessive property damage." "This one involves moderate property damage at most." The Po Cup was scheduled for the following afternoon. Harry spent the evening in the library, which was magnificent, for stories of dark wood and rolling ladders and books that ranged from standard academic texts to genuinely dangerous tomes that hummed with contained power. He wasn't researching the race. He was researching Nevermore's founding. The official history was clean and simple, for outcast families, a shared vision, a school built from nothing. But official histories were always clean and simple, because the messy truth got edited out by people who preferred their narratives tidy. Harry pulled records, cross-referenced dates, traced property deeds and building permits and the mundane paper trail that magic couldn't entirely obscure. He found the gap at midnight. Between 1764 and 1771, there was a 7-year hole in Nevermore's records. No documents, no correspondence, no administrative notes. 7 years of perfect silence, as if the school had ceased to exist. And when the records resumed in 1771, the language had changed, new terminology, new administrative structures, and buried in the founding charter's amendments, a clause that Harry had to read 3 times to believe. The Academy shall maintain absolute separation from external magical governance, in perpetuity, recognizing no authority, jurisdiction, or oversight from any wizarding body, council, or ministry, this being the fundamental and inviolable condition upon which its protections are maintained. Someone, Dumbledore, or whoever had laid those wards, had built the concealment charms with a condition: the school stayed hidden only as long as it remained independent from the wizarding world. If any wizarding government ever gained authority over Nevermore, the protections would fail. The school would become visible, detectable, vulnerable. It was a dead man's switch. A failsafe designed to ensure that the school could never be co-opted, because the moment it was, the very protections that made it safe would collapse. Clever. Manipulative. Absolutely characteristic of Dumbledore. But why? Why would a wizard, the most powerful and politically connected wizard of his age, go to such lengths to protect an outcast school from his own world? Unless he wasn't protecting the school. Unless he was protecting the wizarding world from something inside the school. Harry closed the book and stared at the library ceiling and thought about the thing in the forest, the presence that had retreated from his magic. Something old. Something contained. The dead man's switch wasn't just a failsafe. It was a cage. He left the library at 2 a.m, walking the empty corridors with his mind racing. As he rounded the corner toward his dormitory wing, he stopped. Someone was in the hallway ahead. Not a student, the figure was too tall, too still, standing in the shadows between two windows where the moonlight didn't reach. Harry's magic flared, reading the figure's energy, and found nothing. A void. The same smooth, featureless blankness he'd felt from Thornhill. MS. Thornhill, Harry said conversationally. Unusual hour for a stroll. She stepped out of the shadows. Her warm, approachable demeanor was gone, stripped away like a mask removed, and what was underneath was sharp and watchful and nothing like the cheerful botany teacher she performed during the day. Harrison. You're up late. Research. The library is addictive. Harry didn't move, didn't tense, didn't show anything. You, on the other hand, look like you were waiting for someone. I was checking the wards. Part of my duties as a faculty member. The wards you don't have the magical signature to interact with. Silence. The corridor felt very small. Thornhill's expression underwent a transformation. The warmth didn't come back, instead, something else surfaced. Something colder, harder, but also more honest. She looked at Harry as if seeing him clearly for the first time, and whatever she saw, it didn't frighten her. It made her careful. You're perceptive, she said. More perceptive than any student I've encountered here. I'm not your average student. No. You're not. She took a step closer, and her void concealment flickered, just for an instant, a crack in the shell, and Harry caught a flash of what was underneath. Grief. Rage. A deep, abiding hatred so controlled and compressed that it had become something almost elegant. I'll give you some advice, Harrison. Free of charge. Stop pulling at the wards. Stop digging into the founding records. Some things are buried for a reason. In my experience, the things people bury are exactly the things that need to be dug up. In my experience, Thornhill said softly, the people who dig tend to end up buried themselves. She walked past him without another word, her footsteps silent on the stone, and disappeared around the corner. Harry stood in the moonlit corridor and let his heart rate return to normal, which took about 3 seconds because his heart rate had barely changed. He'd faced worse than veiled threats in empty hallways. He'd faced everything. But Thornhill's concealment had cracked, and in that crack, he'd seen something. Not just emotion, information. A fragment of her actual magical signature, hidden beneath the occlumency shell. She wasn't an outcast. She wasn't a wizard. She was a normie. A human woman with no supernatural power of her own, who had somehow acquired wizard-grade mental concealment and infiltrated a school for outcasts. And underneath the rage and grief, buried so deep that Harry almost missed it, he'd felt something else. A name. Not spoken, not conscious, just the emotional fingerprint of a word that defined her entire existence. Crackstone. The Po Cup dawned gray and cold, the lake shrouded in mist that turned the water into a sheet of hammered silver. The entire school gathered on the shore, students, faculty, Weems presiding over the event with the practiced enthusiasm of someone who'd rather be anywhere else but understood the political value of tradition. 8 boats were lined up at the starting point, each decorated in their team's colors. Bianca's team had a sleek black vessel with silver trim, enchanted to sit low and fast in the water. The werewolf pack had gone for brute functionality, a wide, stable craft designed to be powered by raw strength. Xavier's team had a boat that appeared to have been painted psychically, its hull covered in swirling, living artwork that shifted as you watched. Harry's team had the worst boat. This was by design, the good boats had been claimed early, and the rejects got what was left, which was a battered vessel that looked like it might sink under the weight of strong language. "We're going to die," Yoko said, staring at it. "Probably not," Harry said. "Get in." The race was simple in concept: cross the lake, retrieve your team's flag from the island in the center, and return. First team back wins. Supernatural abilities were permitted, encouraged even, the whole point was to showcase what outcasts could do. What nobody expected was what an Addams could do. The starting horn blew. 7 boats surged forward, sirens singing wind into their sails, werewolves rowing with superhuman strength, telekinetics pushing their vessels through the water. Harry's team sat in their terrible boat and waited. Harry?" Rowan said. "They're leaving." "I know. Should we go?" "In a moment." Wednesday, standing on the shore with her arms crossed, watched her brother with the faint, barely perceptible tension that meant she was trying not to be entertained. Harry placed his hand on the gunwale of the boat and let his magic flow into the wood. The boat shuddered. Then it changed. Not dramatically, not with the flashy spectacle of transfiguration, this was something subtler, deeper. Harry's magic sank into the vessel's structure and convinced it. Convinced the wood that it was lighter. Convinced the hull that water was not an obstacle but a road. Convinced the air around the sails that it wanted to move, quickly, in one specific direction. The boat lifted 3 inches off the water's surface and began to glide. "Oh," said Divina. "Oh wow." "Hold on," Harry said. The boat shot forward like a stone from a sling. Not sailing, not rowing, skating across the surface of the lake on a cushion of magic that turned water to glass beneath it. Harry stood at the prow with one hand on the mast and the other extended, guiding, directing, his magic pouring out of him in controlled waves that bent the physics of the lake to his will. They passed the werewolf boat in seconds. The pack stared as Harry's vessel blurred by them, moving at a speed that boats simply weren't supposed to achieve. Enid, in the middle of rowing, dropped her oar to wave. They caught Bianca's team halfway to the island. The sirens had wind in their sails and a smooth, coordinated rhythm that spoke to weeks of practice, and none of it mattered. Harry's boat passed them like they were standing still, and Bianca looked up at Harry as he went by, and her expression was not anger. It was a kind of bewildered, reluctant awe. Then things went wrong. The explosion came from the left, a blast of force that hit the water 30 feet from Harry's boat and sent a wall of spray crashing over them. Not an accident. A deliberate attack, aimed at capsizing them, and Harry traced its origin in a heartbeat. One of the other teams, a group he hadn't paid much attention to, whose telekinetic member was grinning with the vicious satisfaction of someone who thought cheating was strategy. "Sabotage," Yoko snarled. "Typical." The nightshade-adjacent teams always, a second blast hit closer. The boat rocked, and Divina screamed, and Harry felt the vessel's fragile enchantment strain as the water surged beneath them. A third blast. This one was aimed at the werewolf boat, not at Harry's team at all, but at Enid's. It hit the waterline and the boat lurched sideways, shipping water, students tumbling. Harry saw Enid go over the side, saw her splash into the grey water, saw the boat roll and come down on top of the space she'd been in. Harry moved. He didn't think. Didn't calculate. Didn't weigh the consequences or consider the optics. A girl was in the water under a capsizing boat, and Harry's body was already in motion because some things don't change between lives, the instinct to protect, to throw yourself between danger and the innocent, that was coded into him deeper than memory, deeper than magic. His power erupted. The lake froze. Not all of it, a radius, 50 feet in every direction from Harry's outstretched hands, the water crystallizing into a flat, stable surface of blue-white ice. The capsizing boat halted mid-roll, locked in place by ice that climbed its hull and held it. The wave from the third blast solidified into a wall of frozen water, suspended in mid-crash, its spray caught in the air like glass sculpture. Enid was in the water. Because the water around her froze into a gentle cradle of ice that rose, lifting her up, supporting her, setting her on the frozen surface as carefully as a hand placing a china cup on a shelf. The entire lake, the boats, the students, the faculty on shore, went dead silent. Harry stood in his boat, hands still outstretched, magic pouring off him in visible waves of cold light. The ice beneath him was flawless, mirror smooth, and it spread in every direction like a frozen kingdom, and every person on the lake could feel it, the sheer, staggering weight of the power it had taken to do this. Not the ice itself, impressive as it was, but the control. The precision. Freezing the water around a falling student without freezing the student. Stopping a capsizing boat without shattering it. Catching spray in midair. That wasn't just power. That was mastery. Enid sat on the ice, soaking wet, gasping, staring up at Harry with an expression of open-mouthed amazement. Her werewolf teammates were scattered across the frozen surface, equally stunned. On the shore, Weems had risen to her feet, one hand pressed to her mouth. Harry lowered his hands. The ice held. It would hold as long as he wanted it to, minutes, hours, days. It cost him nothing. This was what unshackled magic looked like. Not effort. Not strain. Just will, translated into reality. He looked at the team that had launched the attacks. They were frozen in place, not literally, though their boat was locked in ice like the others, but frozen by fear, by the sudden, visceral understanding that they had tried to sabotage someone who could reshape the physical world with a gesture. The girl could have drowned, Harry said. His voice carried across the ice, clear and calm and cold. She could have been crushed. You aimed at a boat full of people and didn't care what happened to them. The telekinetic who'd launched the blasts, a heavy-set boy whose confidence had evaporated like morning frost, tried to speak. It was just, the race, everyone does it, not anymore. Harry's eyes were green fire. Not while I'm here. He released the ice. It didn't melt, it sublimated, transitioning directly from solid to vapor in a wave that swept outward from Harry's position, the lake reconstituting itself in seconds, boats settling back into water, the frozen wave collapsing into gentle ripples. Enid's ice cradle dissolved last, lowering her into the water where her teammates quickly pulled her back into their righted boat. The Po Cup continued. Harry's team won, they'd been so far ahead before the incident that nobody could catch them, and Harry's boat glided to the island and back with the effortless superiority of a vessel that had been politely asked to ignore physics. But the race wasn't what people would remember. What they would remember was the ice. The power. The boy who'd frozen a lake to save a girl and then looked at the people responsible and made them understand, without threat or violence, that there were lines that should not be crossed. Weems found him after the trophy presentation, which Harry had allowed Yoko to accept because the vampire clearly needed the win more than he did. "My office," Weems said. "Now." Her office was elegant and controlled, every surface organized, every piece of furniture chosen to project authority. Weems sat behind her desk and looked at Harry across its expanse, and her professional mask was thin enough to read the anxiety underneath. That display on the lake saved a student from drowning. That display on the lake was beyond anything I've seen from a student at this school. Beyond anything I've seen from most adults. You froze 50 feet of open water in under a second, with precision control fine enough to avoid harming anyone in the affected radius. That's not outcast magic, Harrison. That's not any category of magic I'm familiar with. Harry sat in the chair opposite her desk, completely at ease. What category of magic are you familiar with, Principal Weems? Don't deflect. I'm not deflecting. I'm asking a genuine question. You're a shapeshifter. Your power operates on biological transformation, cellular restructuring, physical mimicry. It's impressive, but it's bounded. Your frame of reference for magical ability is limited to what you've personally experienced and what you've been taught exists. Harry leaned forward slightly. I'm an Addams. My family's abilities don't fit neatly into outcast taxonomy because they predate it. What I did on the lake isn't unusual for me. It's baseline. Weems stared at him. Baseline. I understand that it looked dramatic. It wasn't, from my perspective. A student was in danger and I responded. If you're concerned about collateral damage, there wasn't any. If you're concerned about a threat to other students, I'm the furthest thing from it, I was protecting them. If you're concerned about something else. Harry let the pause hang. Then I'd suggest saying what you're actually concerned about. Weems was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, the administrative veneer had thinned almost to transparency, and underneath it Harry could see the woman, tired, burdened, trying to run a school full of supernatural teenagers while something dark circled in the forest. I'm concerned, she said carefully, that your presence here will attract attention that Nevermore cannot afford. From whom? From anyone. The outcast world has existed in the margins for centuries, Harrison. We survive by not being noticed. By being small, being quiet, being unthreatening. A display of power like what you showed today, if that gets out, if the wrong people learn what's walking the halls of this school, then what? They'll come for me. For the school. Harry shook his head. Principal Weems, I've spent my life being told to be smaller. To hide what I am. To make myself palatable for people who are afraid of what they can't control. I'm done with that. I will not pretend to be less than I am to make others comfortable. Not for you, not for this school, not for anyone. He stood. I am not a threat to your students. I'm the best protection they've got. If something comes, and I think we both know something is coming, because you've felt it too, in the wards, in the forest, in the way the school's magic has been trembling for months, you're going to be glad I'm here. He walked to the door, then stopped. One more thing. The wizard wards in the foundations, the concealment matrix built into the school's core. You know about them. Weems didn't answer. But she didn't deny it, and her face went very carefully blank, and that was answer enough. I'm not going to expose them, Harry said. But I am going to understand them. And when I do, we should talk again. Honestly, this time. He left. Weems sat alone in her office and pressed her hands flat on her desk and breathed slowly, and outside her window, the lake was calm and still and showed no sign of having been frozen solid an hour ago, as if even the water had decided it was wiser not to remember. Dinner that evening was a different experience. Harry walked into the dining hall and felt the shift, every head turning, every conversation dipping, the subtle recalibration of social dynamics that happens when a new power enters an established hierarchy. The Poe Cup had rewritten the map. Harry Addams wasn't a new student anymore. He was a variable, an unknown, a force that had demonstrated the ability to reshape the physical world and the willingness to use that ability without hesitation or apology. Enid found him before he'd even sat down. She launched herself at him with a hug that was half tackle, half emotional outpouring, and Harry, who had not been hugged by anyone outside his family in 16 years of this life, went rigid for exactly 1 second before something old and tired inside him relaxed, and he let her. "You saved my life," Enid said into his shoulder. Her voice was muffled and slightly wobbly. "The boat was coming down right on top of me and I couldn't move and the water was so cold and then it just stopped. Everything stopped. And I was floating on ice and it was warm." "Harry, the ice you made was warm. How is that even possible? I didn't want you to be cold." Enid pulled back and looked at him with shining eyes. "You didn't want me to be cold," she repeated. "You froze an entire lake and you specifically made my part warm because you didn't want me to be cold. It seemed rude to rescue someone from drowning only to give them hypothermia." Enid hugged him again, harder, and Harry caught Wednesday's eye across the dining hall. His sister was watching from her usual corner, and her expression hadn't changed, but something in the angle of her head said you did well and also you're going to have to deal with her being emotionally attached to you now, you realize that. Harry sat with Enid and her pack for dinner, because Enid's hand was on his sleeve and she was clearly not planning to release him anytime soon, and Wednesday materialized beside them with her tray because where Harry went, Wednesday followed, and the universe simply arranged itself around this fact. "I've heard of the Addams family," said Ajax, one of the werewolves, a gorgon who kept his snakes hidden under a beanie. "My grandma used to tell stories. She said your family's been around since before the outcast communities formed. Like, way before. The Addams family has existed in various forms for approximately 8 centuries, Wednesday said, dissecting her meal with surgical precision. Our ancestral home predates the founding of most modern nations. We have an extensive graveyard." "She says that like it's a selling point," Enid stage whispered. "It is a selling point," Harry and Wednesday said simultaneously. Ajax leaned forward. "So what are you guys, exactly?" "Not werewolves, not sirens, not psychics. We're Addamses," Harry said. "That's its own category. But your power, the thing on the lake, that was, beyond classification," Wednesday finished. "Our family's abilities don't conform to standard outcast taxonomies. We exist outside the system." "Modestly put," said Bianca Barkley, who had appeared at the end of their table with the social precision of someone who knew exactly when and where to insert herself for maximum impact. She stood with one hand on her hip, looking at Harry with that same complicated expression from the gym, adversarial respect, grudging fascination. What Addams did today wasn't just powerful. It was controlled. That's what scares people. Power is common at Nevermore. Control like that is not. "I'm not trying to scare anyone," Harry said. "I know. That's what makes it scarier." Bianca pulled out a chair and sat down, uninvited, with the confidence of someone who had never in her life waited for an invitation. "The team that attacked, they're Nightshade adjacent. The Nightshades are the school's oldest secret society. They consider themselves the elite, the true heirs of Nevermore's founding. They're not going to take what happened today well. Should I be concerned? You should be aware. There's a difference." Bianca studied him. "The Nightshades have power, connections, and a very long memory. Their leader this year is a legacy student with ties to 3 of the 4 founding families. He doesn't like being upstaged, and what you did today didn't just upstage him, it rendered the entire power structure he relies on irrelevant. I froze some water to save a drowning girl. If that threatened someone's power structure, the structure was already fragile." Bianca's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. "You're either very brave or very naive. I'm an Addams. We're constitutionally incapable of being naive. Brave, occasionally. Dramatic, frequently. Naive, never. He gets that from our father," Wednesday said. The table had become something, not a faction, not an alliance, but a gathering. Enid and her wolves, Wednesday, Harry, Bianca. Rowan drifted over, drawn by the gravitational pull of Harry's presence. Xavier appeared from nowhere, sketch pad under his arm, claiming the last empty chair with a nod to Harry that contained the shared shorthand of roommates who'd established an unspoken truce. It was, Harry realized with a start, the first time in either of his lives that he'd sat at a table surrounded by people who were there because they chose to be. Not because of prophecy, not because of politics, not because of who he was supposed to be. Just because they wanted to be near him. The feeling was terrifying. And good. Both at once. After dinner, Harry and Wednesday walked the grounds. The evening was cool, autumn creeping in at the edges, and the forest was a dark wall against the darkening sky. They walked in their usual formation, side by side, shoulders nearly touching, their strides perfectly matched. The Po Cup wasn't just a race, Wednesday said. It was a test. Weems wanted to see what the new students could do. And you showed her everything. I showed her enough. There's a difference. Wednesday glanced at him. Is there? The ice was impressive, Harry. The control was more impressive. But the specificity, warming the ice under Enid, avoiding damage to the boats, targeting the freeze radius with precision, that told anyone watching exactly how fine-tuned your abilities are. You didn't just display power. You displayed range. A girl was drowning. I know. And you saved her. And you'd do it again, and you'd make the same choice every time, because despite everything that was done to you, despite every reason you have to let the world burn, you are constitutionally incapable of watching someone get hurt and doing nothing. Wednesday's voice was flat and clinical, but her hand found his arm, and her fingers pressed once, briefly. It's your most dangerous quality. My willingness to help people. Your inability to stop. One day someone will use it against you. Someone will put a person in danger specifically to draw you out, to force you to reveal what you can do, to study your reactions. And you'll fall for it every time because you can't not. Harry was quiet for a while. They'd reached the edge of the forest, where the tree line began and the school's groomed grounds gave way to wild undergrowth. The darkness between the trunks was absolute. You're not wrong, he said finally. It's happened before. I know. It killed you. The words hung in the air, quiet and devastating and true. Wednesday was the only person alive who knew the full story, not because Harry had told her, but because they were twins, and their bond went deeper than words, deeper than memory. She'd known since they were children. She'd felt it, the shape of his other life, the weight of his death, the scars that didn't show on skin. She'd never asked him to explain. She'd never demanded details. She'd simply known, the way she knew everything, with the direct, unflinching clarity that was her defining trait. It won't happen again, Harry said. I'm not that person anymore. You're exactly that person. You're just better armed. Something moved in the forest. They both felt it, the same presence from the night before, the dark, heavy consciousness that lurked beneath the trees. It was closer tonight. Bolder. Harry could feel its hunger like heat from an open flame, primal and undirected, the appetite of something that killed because it was built to kill. But underneath the animal hunger, he felt the leash. Subtle, threaded through the creature's psyche like wire through clay, a controlling influence that guided its movements and selected its targets. And the leash was, there, he had it, magical. Specifically magical. Wizarding magic, structured and deliberate, a compulsion charm of enormous sophistication woven into the creature's neural pathways. It's a hide, Wednesday confirmed, her eyes fixed on the tree-line. She'd had another vision, Harry could tell from the slight tension in her jaw, the way her pupils had dilated. Male. Young. He doesn't know what he is. The transformations are involuntary, someone is triggering them externally. The leash is wizard-made. Compulsion magic, deeply embedded. Whoever did this is skilled, this isn't amateur work. Can you trace the leash to its source? Not from here. I'd need to be closer to the hide while it's transformed. The compulsion is dormant when the host is human. Harry considered. We need to identify the host. I'm working on it. My visions are fragmentary, but they're consistent. Male, student age, local. He has a connection to the school but he's not enrolled. Tyler Galpin. The name surfaced in Harry's mind immediately. The boy in the Jericho sweatshirt at orientation, the sheriff's son who shouldn't have been there, whose hands had been clenched and whose eyes had sought the exits. The coffee shop boy, Harry said. Wednesday nodded once. We need proof. We'll get it. But carefully. If his hide is being controlled, he's a victim as much as a weapon. I won't destroy someone who's being used. Harry's jaw tightened. I know what that feels like. The presence in the forest retreated, pulling back into the deep darkness. It had been testing them, probing the edges of their awareness, gauging their response. Or rather, whoever held its leash had been testing them. Harry stared into the trees and felt the ward structure beneath his feet, outcast magic and wizard wards and the old, deep something that slept below both, and made a decision. Tomorrow, he said, I'm going to take the wards apart. Wednesday raised an eyebrow. Not destroy them. Examine them. Layer by layer. I need to understand what Dumbledore built and why. Because whatever is happening at this school, the monster, Thornhill, the wizard magic woven into everything, it's all connected. And the wards are the key. That will take enormous power. I have enormous power. It could trigger the concealment failsafe. If the wards register your probing as an external wizarding intrusion, they won't. The wards know me. They scanned me when I arrived, and they let me in without resistance. Whatever Dumbledore built, it recognizes me. Maybe because of the Hallows. Maybe because of what I am. But the wards trust me, Wednesday. And I'm going to use that trust to find out what they're hiding. Wednesday studied him for a long moment. The night was fully dark now, and they stood at the forest's edge like sentinels, two figures in black against the deeper black of the trees, and the wind stirred the branches above them and somewhere in the distance an owl called. Do it, she said. I'll cover you. From what? From whatever comes when you start breaking locks that have been sealed for centuries. Wednesday's hand moved to the knife sheath at her hip. She'd gotten it past the school's security without effort, because Wednesday Addams did not travel unarmed and any security system that tried to prevent it simply wasn't trying hard enough. I'll be ready. They walked back to the school in silence, side by side, and the darkness behind them was watchful and hungry and patient, and beneath the earth, the ancient wards hummed with a frequency that sounded almost like anticipation. Harry paused at the main entrance and looked up at Nevermore's tower, silhouetted against the stars. The school was beautiful and wounded and full of secrets, and something was coming, something that connected his old life to his new one, something that had been set in motion before he was born, before he died, before death gave him a second chance. His phone buzzed. A text from Gomez. My son. Your mother informs me you froze a lake today. I am bursting with pride. Morticia is sharpening her favorite blade, just in case. We love you beyond the capacity of mortal language to express. Also, Thing says you forgot your spare throwing knives. He's mailing them. Harry smiled. The real kind, the kind that started somewhere deep in his chest and worked its way up, warm and genuine and untouchable. He texted back, tell Mother the lake deserved it. Tell Thing thank you. Tell Father I love him. Gomez's response was immediate, I'm weeping. Beautiful tears of paternal joy. Your mother is pretending not to be moved but she just kissed the phone screen. Wednesday appeared beside him, reading over his shoulder. Father is being father. Always. Mother's sharpening blades. She cares in her own way. She cares in the best way. Wednesday pocketed her own phone, she'd received her own barrage of parental messages and had responded to each with a single period, which was her version of an affectionate essay. "Good night, brother. Good night, sister." They parted at the staircase. Harry climbed to his room, where Xavier was sitting up in bed, sketch pad on his knees, drawing by the light of a single lamp. He looked up when Harry entered, and his expression was troubled. "I drew something while you were gone," Xavier said. "I wasn't trying to. My hand just moved." He turned the pad around. It was Nevermore, the school, seen from above, as if drawn from the perspective of a bird or a satellite. But the school in the drawing was wrong. The buildings were the same, the grounds were the same, but the forest was alive, the trees were moving, reaching, their branches forming shapes that were almost but not quite letters. And beneath the school, drawn in dark, pressured lines that had torn the paper in places, something enormous was curled. Something sleeping. Something with too many limbs and a body made of shadows and a face that was. Harry leaned closer. The face was his. Not Harrison Addams's face. Harry Potter's. The face he'd worn in his first life, younger, scarred, with round glasses and a lightning bolt carved into his forehead. That face, rendered in Xavier's psychic artwork, stared up from beneath the foundations of Nevermore Academy with closed eyes and an expression of ancient, patient waiting. "What does it mean?" Xavier asked. His voice was strained. "I've been having visions since you got here, not normal ones, not the kind I usually get. These are deeper. Like something in the school is trying to talk to me and using you as the language." Harry looked at the drawing for a long time. "It means," he said quietly, "that this school and I have unfinished business." He got into bed and lay in the dark and listened to Xavier's breathing slow into sleep, and beneath him, far below, in the roots of the school and the bones of the earth, the ancient wards pulsed with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat exactly. Tomorrow he would begin to understand why. Tonight, he let himself rest, and the darkness held him gently, and death, somewhere, everywhere, nowhere, watched its favorite son sleep and smiled. Chapter 3, Old Ghosts. Harry began dismantling Dumbledore's wards at 4 in the morning, sitting cross-legged on the cold stone floor of Nevermore's basement, 3 levels below the dormitories, in a room that officially didn't exist. He'd found it by following the ward lines. Every concealment matrix had a heart, a central anchor point where all the threads converged, where the magic was densest, where the original caster had stood and spoken the words and poured their power into the foundations. In most warded buildings, this anchor point was somewhere accessible, a cornerstone, a doorway, a carved rune on a visible surface. Dumbledore, because Dumbledore was never anything less than theatrical about his paranoia, had hidden the anchor point behind 3 layers of misdirection, a false wall that only opened when you pressed on it with a specific magical frequency, and a staircase that descended into a chamber cut from the bedrock itself. The chamber was circular, perhaps 20 feet across, with a domed ceiling carved from living rock. The walls were covered in runes, not engraved, but grown into the stone, as if the rock itself had decided to form these shapes. They spiraled inward from the edges to a central point on the floor where a single symbol blazed with steady silver light. The Deathly Hallows. Harry stared at it. The triangle, the circle, the line. His mark. His burden. His inheritance. "You old bastard," Harry murmured, and there was no heat in it, just the weary recognition of a man who'd been outmaneuvered by a ghost. Dumbledore had keyed the anchor point to the Hallows symbol. The wards weren't just wizard-made, they were specifically designed to respond to the Master of Death. Which meant Dumbledore had known, even then, even before Harry was born or prophesied or manipulated into existence, that the Master of Death would eventually come to Nevermore. Harry placed his palm on the symbol. The wards opened like a book. Information cascaded through him, not in words, not in images, but in the raw language of magic itself, which was older than human speech and communicated in patterns and resonances and the deep structural grammar of reality. Harry processed it the way he processed everything magical, instinctively, fluently, with the ease of someone for whom magic was not a tool but a native tongue. The concealment matrix, vast, multi-layered, designed to hide Nevermore from every form of wizarding detection. But that was only the surface. Beneath it, woven into the same ward structure, was a second function, a containment grid. Not keeping things out. Keeping something in. Harry pushed deeper. The containment grid was anchored to 4 cardinal points around the school's perimeter, each marked with a buried ward stone. The grid formed a 3-dimensional cage, hemisphere above ground, hemisphere below, and at its center, directly beneath the room where Harry sat, something lived. Not the monster in the forest. Something else. Something much, much older. Harry reached for it with his magic, carefully, the way you'd extend a hand toward a sleeping animal you weren't sure was friendly. His power brushed the edge of the containment grid and felt what was inside, a consciousness, ancient and vast and not quite awake, dreaming in the deep earth. Not malevolent. Not benevolent. Simply old, with the terrible neutrality of something that had existed before human concepts like good and evil had been invented. It felt him too. The consciousness stirred. Not waking, shifting in its sleep, the way a dreamer turns toward a sound. Harry felt it reach back, felt the tentative brush of something immense touching his magic with the delicacy of a giant handling a snowflake. Recognition. It knew him. Not Harrison Addams, not Harry Potter, something deeper than either identity. It recognized what he was. The thread of death woven through his soul, the Hallows mark, the impossible fusion of wizard and Addams and something that transcended both. Harry received, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, a single coherent transmission from the sleeping consciousness. Not words. An image. A memory. He saw Dumbledore, younger, his beard auburn instead of white, his eyes sharp with the particular intensity of a man executing a plan decades in the making. He stood in this very chamber, hands raised, power pouring out of him in rivers of silver light. And around him, working in concert, 4 figures Harry didn't recognize, outcasts, clearly, their power wild and primal, each one standing at a cardinal point of the circle. They were building the cage together. Wizard and outcast, cooperating. And what they were caging, Harry saw it. Just a glimpse, a fragment, the sleeping consciousness's own memory of what it had been before the cage closed around it. A rift in the earth. A place where the boundary between life and death had worn thin, where the dead could whisper to the living and the living could fall through into the dark. A natural nexus point, a wound in reality's fabric, and from it, things had been bleeding through for centuries, dark things, hungry things, things that wore human faces but had nothing human behind them. Nevermore hadn't been built to educate outcasts. It had been built on top of the rift, built to contain it, to cap it, to use the combined supernatural energy of hundreds of outcasts as a living battery that kept the cage charged and the rift sealed. The students were the power source. They always had been. Harry withdrew from the ward slowly, carefully, leaving no trace of his intrusion. He sat in the silver light of the Hallows symbol and stared at the wall and felt sick in a way that had nothing to do with his body. Dumbledore had done it again. Even from beyond the grave, even in another world, another life. The same pattern, find vulnerable people, gather them together, use them as pieces in a game they didn't know they were playing. The outcasts thought Nevermore was a haven. It was a machine. They were the fuel. He climbed the stairs, sealed the false wall behind him, and emerged into the pre-dawn corridors of the school. Wednesday was waiting, because of course she was. She leaned against the opposite wall with her arms folded, fully dressed, not a hair out of place, radiating the particular frequency of impatience that meant she'd been standing there for exactly as long as she'd decided was acceptable and not a second longer. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "Worse. I've seen a pattern." Harry walked, and she fell into step beside him, and he told her everything. The chamber, the Hallows symbol, the containment grid, the rift, the students as living batteries. All of it, in low, precise sentences, because Wednesday didn't need embellishment, she needed data. She was silent for a long time when he finished. The outcast communities have sent their children here for centuries, she said finally. Generations. Believing they were being educated. Protected. They were being used. Does the rift actually need containing? Harry considered. Yes. What I felt down there, the consciousness, the things it described bleeding through, that's real. The rift is dangerous. Leaving it unsealed would be catastrophic. But the method. He shook his head. There are other ways. Better ways. You don't need to farm children's magic to power a containment grid. You could build a self-sustaining ward structure, draw power from ley lines, use a rotational system with informed, consenting adults. Dumbledore chose the most exploitative option because it served multiple purposes: contain the rift, gather all the outcasts in one place where they could be monitored, and keep them ignorant of the real reason they were there. Control disguised as kindness. His specialty. They reached the dining hall. It was empty at this hour, too early for even the most dedicated students. Harry sat at their usual table and Wednesday sat across from him, and for a while neither of them spoke. The silence was full, heavy with implications. We can't expose this yet, Wednesday said. If the outcast communities learn the truth about Nevermore's founding, they'll pull their children out. The student body will shrink. The containment grid will weaken. And the rift will open. So we need to replace the power source before we can tell anyone the truth. Yes. And I can do it. My magic is more than enough to sustain the grid indefinitely. I could power it myself, or restructure it to draw from the ley lines that run beneath the property. But I need time. Weeks, minimum. The ward structure is centuries old and deeply integrated. Changing the power source without destabilizing the containment is delicate work. Then we buy time. Keep investigating Thornhill, the Hyde, the Wizarding connection. Solve the immediate threat while you work on the larger one. Harry nodded. It was a good plan. It was a Wednesday plan, strategic, methodical, cold. It was also exactly what Dumbledore would have done, which made his skin crawl, but that didn't make it wrong. There's something else, Harry said. The consciousness beneath the school, the rift entity. It recognized me. Not as Harry Potter, not as Harrison Addams. It recognized the Hallows mark. The threat of death. What does that mean? I'm not sure yet. But it wasn't hostile. It was curious. And old. Old enough that I think it's been aware of the school built on top of it for centuries, and it's been cooperating with the containment because it chose to, not because it was forced. An entity that predates human civilization is voluntarily allowing itself to be caged. Possibly. Or possibly it's waiting for something. The ward anchor was keyed to the Hallows symbol, to me, specifically. Dumbledore designed it that way. He knew the Master of Death would come here eventually. Dumbledore planned for everything. Dumbledore planned for what served his purposes. The question is whether his purposes and ours happen to align. Harry rubbed his eyes. I need coffee. You need sleep. I'll sleep when the existential threats have been addressed. That's what you said last week. And the week before. The existential threats persist, Wednesday. She almost rolled her eyes. From Wednesday, this was the equivalent of a full emotional breakdown. The day's classes passed in a blur of normalcy that felt surreal against the backdrop of Harry's discoveries. He sat through botanical sciences, taught by Thornhill, whose warm teacher mask was flawless and whose concealed blankness pulsed beneath it like a second heartbeat, survived advanced outcast linguistics, a class that theorized about the common magical root of outcast abilities, taught by a droning professor who could put a caffeinated werewolf to sleep, and spent his free period in the library continuing his research into Nevermore's founding. He was deep in a pre-colonial account of outcast settlements in New England when his magic screamed. Not figuratively. His power, which existed as a constant, steady presence in his consciousness, a background hum, a warmth in his chest, the awareness of the world's magical structure that he carried like a sixth sense, suddenly spiked with a frequency he hadn't felt in 16 years. Wizarding magic. Incoming. Multiple signatures, structured information, the standard configuration of a British horror team. Moving fast, crossing the concealment boundary at the school's perimeter, passing through Dumbledore's wards as if they had a key. Harry stood so fast his chair toppled. Around him, the library trembled, books shivering on shelves, the magical texts humming with agitation as they sensed his power surging. They had a key. The wizarding delegation had a way through the wards. Which meant someone had given them one, because Dumbledore's concealment was designed to be impenetrable from outside unless you had the specific counter-frequency. Thornhill. It had to be Thornhill. She had wizard-grade concealment techniques. She'd been in the corridors at 2 in the morning, checking the wards. She'd warned Harry away from investigating. And she had access, not to the main anchor point, but to the perimeter stones. If she'd modified even one of them, created a gap, a door, the delegation was already on school grounds. Harry moved. Not running, moving the way his magic moved, fluid and inevitable, space contracting around him as he walked because when Harrison Addams wanted to be somewhere, the distance between here and there became a polite suggestion rather than a physical constraint. He covered the distance from library to main entrance in seconds, arriving just as the front doors opened and the delegation walked in. 6 Aurors in standard robes, wands drawn but lowered, faces set in the professional blankness of people following orders. Behind them, 2 figures Harry would have recognized in any life, any world, any body. Ron Weasley had gone grey at the temples. It didn't suit him, it made him look worn rather than distinguished, a man aged by the constant effort of justifying his own choices to himself. He wore the head Auror badge like armor, and his hand rested on his wand with the easy familiarity of someone who used it often and not always justly. Hermione Granger Weasley stood beside him, and she had not aged a day. That was the unsettling thing, she looked exactly as Harry remembered, polished and precise and put together, every hair in place, her ministry robes pristine. She carried a leather folder. Of course she did. Hermione always carried documentation for her cruelties. The entrance hall was filling with students. Word traveled fast at Nevermore, a supernatural school full of psychics, enhanced senses, and gossip networks that operated at the speed of thought. Within minutes, a crowd had gathered, pressing against the edges of the hall, watching with the wide-eyed wariness of people who recognized an invasion even when it came wearing diplomatic clothes. Wednesday appeared at Harry's left shoulder. She'd crossed the building from a different direction and arrived at the same moment, because twins, because Addams, because when trouble came they met it as a unit. Weems descended the main staircase with the controlled urgency of someone trying very hard not to run. Her face was white. This is a private institution. You have no authority, we have international authority, actually, Hermione said, and her voice was the same. God, it was exactly the same, clear, confident, carrying the unshakable conviction that she was the smartest person in any room and therefore entitled to make decisions for everyone in it. She opened her leather folder and produced a document. The International Statute of Magical Secrecy, Article 14, grants any signatory wizarding government the right to investigate unregistered magical concentrations that may pose a threat to the statute's integrity. This school represents such a concentration. This school has existed for 300 years without any wizarding government taking an interest, Weems said. Why now? Hermione's eyes moved past Weems, past the crowd of students, and found Harry. For a moment, just a moment, something human moved behind her polished surface. Shock. Grief. The desperate, involuntary recognition of a face you'd known better than your own. Harry saw it, catalogued it, and felt nothing. Or felt everything, compressed so tightly it registered as nothing. The difference was academic. Because of him, Hermione said. The hall went quiet. Every eye turned to Harry. He stood at the center of the crowd, Wednesday at his shoulder, and he didn't move, didn't react, didn't give them a single thing they could use. Ron was staring. His face had gone the color of old paper. His hand, the one resting on his wand, was shaking. He can't, Hermione, that's not possible. And yet, Harry said. His voice cut through the hall like a blade through silk. Not loud. Not angry. Just present, with the absolute, unmistakable authority of someone who had stopped being afraid of anything a very long time ago. Hello, Ron. Hello, Hermione. You both look exactly the way I'd expect. Which is to say, like people who've spent 16 years pretending the thing they did wasn't the thing they did. Ron took a step back. Involuntary. Primal. The survival instinct of a man whose body remembered danger even when his mind refused to acknowledge it. Hermione didn't step back. She clutched her folder tighter and lifted her chin. Harry. We detected your magical signature. The monitoring systems flagged it a few days ago. We thought it was an error. You were declared dead. Yes. Because you killed me. Silence. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses down on a room and makes the air taste metallic. The students watching didn't understand the context, but they understood the tone. They understood the way Harry looked at these two adults in wizard robes and made them seem small. Hermione's composure cracked again, that same fracture he'd seen in the dungeon, the fissure between what she was doing and what she knew she was doing. The procedure was sanctioned. It was legal. The Wisengamot, the procedure was a forced magical extraction that ripped my soul apart while I was chained to a wall, Harry said, and his voice was still calm, still measured, each word placed with surgical precision. You watched. You designed it. You wrote the law that made it possible. You called it the Magical Heritage Preservation Act, and you told yourselves it was for the greater good, and I died on a Monday afternoon while Kingsley Shacklebolt held the ward and Ginny Weasley watched from the doorway and Neville Longbottom couldn't look me in the eye. He took a step forward. The Aurors tensed. 6 wands rose fractionally, not pointed at him, not yet, but ready. Harry noted their positions, their formations, their likely spell sequences. Habit. The kind of tactical awareness you don't lose across lifetimes. You came here for me, Harry said. Not for the school. Not for Article 14. You detected my signature and you came because you're afraid. Because you killed me and I didn't stay dead, and that means everything you've built on my grave, every law, every policy, every political career, is sitting on a lie that just stood up and looked you in the face. Harry, Ron's voice was rough, strangled. How are you alive? The ritual, there was nothing left. We checked. There was nothing, I know. I was there for that part. Briefly. Harry's expression didn't change. Did you check because you were worried you'd failed, or because you were worried you hadn't? I've always wondered. Ron flinched like he'd been slapped. We're not here to relitigate the past, Hermione said, and she'd found her composure again, reassembled it brick by brick, the way she always did. We're here because an unregistered magical signature of unprecedented power has appeared in a location that is not recognized by any wizarding government. Under international law, we have the right and obligation to investigate. International law, Wednesday said, speaking for the first time, does not supersede national sovereignty. This school is located on American soil, falls under the jurisdiction of the American magical community, such as it is, and has no treaty obligations with the British Ministry of Magic. Your Article 14 claim is legally dubious, jurisdictionally inappropriate, and practically speaking, irrelevant. She paused. I'm familiar with the statute. All 743 articles. Would you like me to cite the specific provisions that invalidate your presence here? Hermione's gaze snapped to Wednesday. She assessed, Harry could see her doing it, the rapid, clinical evaluation of a potential obstacle. And you are? Wednesday Addams. His sister. Harry doesn't have a sister. Harry Potter didn't have a sister, Harry said. Harrison Addams does. It's a distinction I'd encourage you to internalize, because the woman standing next to me will be significantly less patient with you than I am, and my patience has a very definite limit. Weems stepped forward, positioning herself between the delegation and her students with the protective instinct of a woman who, whatever her flaws and compromises, took her role as guardian seriously. This confrontation is inappropriate. You've entered my school without invitation, frightened my students, and made accusations against a member of my student body. I'm asking you to leave. We'll leave when our investigation is complete, Hermione said. Your investigation is complete, Harry said. You found me. I'm alive. I'm not coming back. We're done. It's not that simple. You're registered as dead in the wizarding world, Harry. Your magical signature is classified as inactive. If you're alive, and clearly you are, that has legal implications. Your properties, your vaults, your titles, were stolen from me by the same government you represent. Were administered in accordance with magical inheritance law upon your presumed death. If you're alive, those assets revert to your estate, but the process requires your cooperation with, I don't cooperate with people who murder me. Personal policy. Very firm on that one. One of the Aurors, a younger man, barely older than Harry, who'd been watching the exchange with the wide-eyed intensity of someone who was slowly realizing that the official story he'd been told about Harry Potter's heroic retirement might not be accurate, shifted uncomfortably. Sir, he said to Ron, maybe we should, shut it, Davies, Ron snapped, but his voice was thin, stretched, the voice of a man whose authority was built on a foundation he could feel crumbling. He looked at Harry, and for the first time, really looked, not at the ghost of the boy he'd betrayed, but at the man that boy had become. The green eyes that hadn't dimmed. The easy, grounded power that radiated from him like heat from a star. The total absence of fear. Ron had expected fear. Harry could see it in his face, the confusion, the recalculation. Ron had come here expecting to find Harry Potter, the boy who sacrificed, who surrendered, who walked into a forest and let a killing curse take him because someone he trusted told him it was necessary. He'd expected to leverage that instinct, that terrible, self-destructive need to be good, to be noble, to put others first even at the cost of himself. What he found instead was an Addams. You've changed, Ron said. Not an accusation. An observation. Almost wondering. I died. That tends to change a person. Harry held Ron's gaze, and in his green eyes there was something older than anger, deeper than resentment. Something that had been forged in a dungeon and tempered in a new life and emerged as a quiet, unbreakable resolve. I'm going to say this once, and I need you to hear it. Both of you. The hall was deathly quiet. Students pressed against the walls, faculty hovering in doorways, every person in the building drawn to this moment by the gravity of what was happening. I am not Harry Potter, Harry said. Harry Potter died in your dungeon. You killed him. What stands in front of you now is someone else, someone with his memories and his magic and his scars, but not his obligations. Not his guilt. Not his pathological need to save people who don't deserve saving. He looked at Hermione. I don't owe you anything. I don't owe the wizarding world anything. I gave it everything, my childhood, my blood, my life, and it took it all and came back for more. That debt is paid. Permanently. Irrevocably. Done. He took another step forward, and the aura shifted, and the air in the hall thickened with the weight of his magic, not threatening, not aggressive, just there, filling the space the way an ocean fills a trench, vast and deep and fundamentally indifferent to anything small enough to be swept away by it. You will leave this school. You will not come back. You will not contact me, surveil me, or attempt to exert any form of legal, magical, or political authority over me or anyone I care about. If you do, I will respond. Not proportionally. Not reasonably. I will respond the way an Addams responds to threats against family, and I promise you, Hermione, you do not want to learn what that looks like. Hermione opened her mouth. She's going to say something about legal precedent, Wednesday said conversationally. Or international cooperation. Or the greater good. Something that sounds reasonable and sounds like a compromise and is actually a mechanism for maintaining control. It's what she does. It's all she does. Hermione closed her mouth. Her eyes were bright, with anger, with frustration, with the particular agony of a brilliant woman encountering a situation her brilliance couldn't solve. We can't just leave, she said. The signature is mine. And it's none of your business. It's the most powerful magical signature we've ever recorded. It's broadcasting across every detection network on the planet. Every wizarding government in the world knows there's something here. If we leave without answers, someone else will come. Someone less diplomatic. Less diplomatic than the people who tortured me to death. The words landed like a hammer. Hermione's composure shattered, not cracked, shattered, and for one raw, unguarded moment, Harry saw the woman underneath the politician. He saw guilt so profound it had reshaped her, grief so complete it had calcified into the rigid, controlling persona she wore like a suit of armor. He saw a woman who knew exactly what she'd done and had spent 16 years building a life that justified it, brick by brick, law by law, promotion by promotion, until the wall was so high she couldn't see over it anymore. Harry saw all of this, and for one heartbeat, just one, he felt something that might have been compassion. The echo of a boy who had loved her, who had trusted her, who had believed she was good. That boy was dead, but his ghost still stirred sometimes, whispering forgiveness. Harry let the ghost speak. Then he let it go. Your detection networks will adjust, he said, quieter now. My signature will stabilize as I settle. Within a few weeks it'll drop below the threshold that triggered your alarms. I'll make sure of it. Not for you, for the school. For the students who have nothing to do with our history and don't deserve to be caught in it. He paused. But if the wizarding world comes for me again, any government, any faction, for any reason, I will not be chained. I will not be bound. I will not be killed. I've already done all three, and I didn't care for the experience. The hall held its breath. Ron looked at Hermione. Something passed between them, not the rapport of old friends, but the practiced communication of two people who'd been managing shared guilt for long enough to develop their own shorthand. Ron shook his head slightly. Hermione's jaw tightened. We'll go, Hermione said. The words cost her. Harry could see the price in the white of her knuckles against the leather folder, in the micro-tremor in her voice. For now. But this isn't over, Harry. The legal questions will be addressed by the Addams family's legal team, if they're addressed at all. My father employs attorneys who make Voldemort look like a moderate inconvenience. I suggest you direct all further communication through them. Hermione absorbed this. Her eyes flicked to Wednesday, who stared back with the flat, unblinking attention of a predator evaluating whether something was worth the effort of killing. You found a family, Hermione said softly. It wasn't a political statement. It was personal, small, human, and it slipped out of her before she could stop it. No, Harry said. A family found me. There's a difference. Hermione nodded once. She turned to leave, the auras forming up around her with military precision. Ron lingered for a moment, standing in the entrance hall of a school he had no right to be in, looking at the boy he'd helped murder who was looking back at him without hatred, without rage, without anything at all, and the absence of emotion was worse than any fury would have been because it meant Ron simply didn't matter anymore. "I'm sorry," Ron said. Barely a whisper. The students nearest him probably didn't hear it, but Harry did. Harry said nothing. He held Ron's gaze for 3 long seconds, then looked away, not in anger, not in dismissal, but with the finality of someone closing a door they had no intention of reopening. Ron left. The delegation crossed the courtyard, passed through the gates, and disappeared. Harry felt them hit the concealment boundary, felt the wards close behind them, and noted with clinical precision that the gap Thornhill had created in the perimeter had sealed itself the moment the delegation passed through. Self-repairing. Interesting. The wards had allowed them in, but they hadn't enjoyed it. The hall erupted. Students talking, questioning, exclaiming. Faculty exchanging tight glances. Weems standing on the staircase with her hand on the banister and her face a mask of controlled alarm. Harry ignored all of it. He walked through the crowd, which parted for him without being asked, and out the side door into the courtyard, and the cold autumn air hit his face and he kept walking, across the grass, past the lake, into the trees at the forest's edge, until the school was out of sight and he was alone. Then he stopped. He pressed his back against a tree and slid down until he was sitting on the ground, and he pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes, and he breathed. In and out. Slow and steady. The breathing technique Morticia had taught him when he was 7 and he'd woken screaming from a nightmare about chains, the first time the dreams had been bad enough for his parents to notice. "They can't hurt you, darling," she'd said, sitting on the edge of his bed, one cool hand on his chest. "They're gone. You're here. You're ours. They hurt me so much, Mother. I know. And one day, the memory of that pain will be a blade in your hand instead of a wound in your heart. But for now, you just breathe." Harry breathed. The forest was quiet around him. His magic, which had been held in fierce, controlled readiness throughout the confrontation, slowly unwound, settling back into its resting state, the constant, warm, immense presence that was as much a part of him as his heartbeat. He didn't cry. He wasn't sure he could anymore. Some things had been burned out of him in the dungeon, cauterized by pain, and tears were one of them. But his body shook. Fine, subtle tremors, the kind that came from muscles held too tight for too long. The adrenaline dump of a confrontation he'd been dreading, on some level, since the day he'd been reborn. 16 years. 16 years of growing, of healing, of building a life that was genuinely, beautifully his. And 10 minutes in a room with Ron and Hermione had nearly stripped it all away, had nearly dragged him back to that dungeon, to those chains, to the boy who had loved them and died for the sin of trusting them. Nearly. Not quite. Because he wasn't that boy anymore. He was Harrison Addams, and the Addams family did not break under pressure, they thrived under it, leaned into it, danced with it. Pain was a familiar companion in their household, not a destroyer but a teacher, and Harry had learned its lessons well. Wednesday found him. She always found him. She didn't speak. She sat down on the ground beside him, her back against the same tree, close enough that their shoulders touched. She pulled out a knife, a different one from yesterday, shorter, with a bone handle, and began cleaning her nails with the tip. They sat like that for a long time. The forest murmured around them. The sun moved behind clouds. Somewhere in the trees, a bird sang a descending melody that sounded like a question without an answer. "I didn't break," Harry said eventually. "No. I wanted to. I know. Not in front of them. After. Just now. I wanted to let it, all of it." He stopped. The words were inadequate. Language was always inadequate for the things that mattered most. "You didn't," Wednesday said. "That's what counts." "Is it?" "It's what counts today. Tomorrow might require more. But today, not breaking is enough." She examined her nails. Apparently satisfied, she sheathed the knife. "Father called. He's on his way." He doesn't need to, he's an Addams. His children were threatened by outsiders in wizard robes. Wild horses could not keep him away. Tame horses certainly couldn't. She paused. He's bringing mother. And the lawyers. And, knowing father, at least 3 swords. Despite everything, despite the trembling and the memories and the ghost of chains on his wrists, Harry laughed. A real laugh, startled and warm and genuine, pulled out of him by the sheer absurdity and perfection of his family. 3 swords. He packed light. Mother probably talked him down from the full armory. Your mother is a stabilizing influence. My mother once poisoned a man for insulting Pugsley's science fair project. She's a selective stabilizing influence. Harry leaned his head back against the tree and closed his eyes and let the laugh carry him for a moment. When it faded, the trembling had stopped. Gomez Addams arrived at Nevermore 4 hours later, which meant he'd left home within minutes of Wednesday's call and broken every speed limit between Massachusetts and Vermont. He arrived not in a hearse but in a 1933 Packard that he'd been restoring since before the twins were born, its engine growling like a living thing, its paint gleaming an impossible black that seemed to absorb light. Morticia sat in the passenger seat. She stepped out of the car the way she stepped out of everything, as if the world had been designed to accommodate her and she was graciously allowing it to do so. Her dress was black. Her expression was murder. Where are they? Morticia said. Gone, Harry said. He and Wednesday had met them at the gates, and Harry could see Gomez taking in his son's face, reading the aftermath of the confrontation with the perceptive intensity that people who only saw his flamboyance tended to miss. I sent them away. They should not have been able to get in at all, Morticia said. This school is supposed to be concealed. Someone created a gap in the perimeter wards. I'm investigating. Gomez said nothing for a moment. He stood by the Packard, one hand resting on the roof, and his face, usually so animated, so bursting with emotion and theatrics, was very still. Very quiet. Did they touch you? He asked. No. Did they threaten you? Obliquely. Did they try to take you? They tried to establish legal authority over me. Same thing, different packaging. Gomez nodded. Slowly. Once. And his eyes, dark, warm, usually dancing with manic energy, went flat and hard and dangerous in a way that reminded Harry, with visceral force, that Gomez Addams was not just an eccentric millionaire with a fencing hobby. He was the head of a family that had survived 8 centuries of persecution, war, and worse by being more ruthless, more resourceful, and more devastating than anything that came for them. The lawyers, Gomez said, will be here by evening. The firm of Tully and Tully, they handle the family's international affairs. They've already filed preliminary injunctions with the International Confederation of Wizards, the American Council of Magic, and 6 other governing bodies whose names I can't pronounce but whose authority is apparently significant. How did you file with the ICW? The wizarding world doesn't know the Addams family exists. Oh, they know, Gomez said, and his smile was back, but it was the other smile, the sharp one, the one that showed too many teeth. They've always known. We simply haven't given them a reason to remember. The Addams family predates the statute of secrecy. We were excluded from it by mutual agreement, they didn't want to try to regulate us, and we didn't want to be bothered with their politics. But the treaties still exist. The legal protections are still in place. And they are very clear on the subject of wizarding governments harassing Addams family members. Morticia glided forward and placed both hands on Harry's face. Her eyes searched his, not for injury, not for damage, but for the deeper thing, the fault line she knew existed because she'd spent 16 years learning its geography. You held, she said. I held. And the mask? Didn't crack. Not until after. Good. That's as it should be. You crack in private, with people who love you. You do not crack for the people who broke you. That is their punishment, they never get to see what they did. Morticia kissed his forehead. I'm proud of you, my darling. Harry closed his eyes and let his mother hold his face and felt the last of the trembling finally, completely stop. Weems met the Addams parents in her office. Harry wasn't present for the conversation, but Wednesday was. She'd slipped into the room uninvited and sat in the corner like a particularly judgmental piece of furniture, and nobody had dared ask her to leave. She reported the details to Harry afterward, on the roof of the dormitory building, where they'd climbed to watch the sunset and plan their next moves. Father was magnificent, Wednesday said. He started with charm, the full Gomez offensive, compliments about the school, praise for Weems's leadership. She was off balance within 30 seconds. Then he shifted to business. The legal team's filing creates a protective shell around you, and by extension, around Nevermore. Any wizarding government that attempts to enter the school grounds again without explicit permission will be in violation of 6 international treaties, 4 of which carry sanctions that include asset seizure and political dissolution. Father plays the long game. Father plays every game simultaneously and wins most of them by making his opponents forget they were playing. Wednesday pulled her jacket tighter against the evening chill. Mother was quieter. She spoke to Weems alone, after Father finished. I don't know exactly what she said, but when they came out, Weems looked like she'd been gently, elegantly terrified. Mother has that effect. Weems agreed to upgrade the school's security. She also agreed to share information about the wizard wards. She admitted she's known about them since she became principal, inherited the knowledge from her predecessor. She doesn't know who built them. She doesn't know about the rift. Good. That stays between us for now. Agreed. Wednesday was quiet for a moment. Harry. The delegation got in through a gap in the wards. A deliberate gap. Thornhill. Almost certainly. But why? If she's infiltrating the school for her own purposes, whatever those purposes are, why invite the wizarding world in? They're a disruption. They draw attention. They complicate whatever she's planning. Harry considered this. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in bands of red and gold that looked like the world was slowly catching fire. Unless she wanted to see how I'd react, he said. She warned me off the wards. I didn't listen. So she escalated, brought in people she knew would provoke me, force me to reveal more of what I could do, demonstrate my connections, test my defenses. She's profiling you. Or she's testing whether I'm an obstacle or a tool. Someone with wizard-grade mental concealment, no outcast power of her own, and a family name connected to one of Nevermore's founding families. Thornhill isn't acting alone. She's working for someone, or towards something, and she needs to know whether I'll get in the way. Or whether she can use you. She can't. She doesn't know that yet. The sunset faded. Stars appeared, sharp and cold. The forest below them was a sea of darkness, and in its depths, something moved, not the hide, not tonight, but the ambient wrongness that lurked at Nevermore's edges, the dark magic that someone was feeding into the ecosystem like poison into a well. I need to accelerate the ward restructuring, Harry said. If Thornhill has access to the perimeter, she could create another gap. Next time it might not be British horrors, it might be something worse. How much time do you need? For the full restructuring, replacing the student battery with a ley line draw. Weeks. But I can patch the perimeter tomorrow. Lock out unauthorized modifications. Anyone who tries to tamper with the wards again will find the wards pushing back. Do it. Harry nodded. They sat in silence on the rooftop, twin silhouetted against the stars, and below them the school hummed with the restless energy of a building that was slowly waking up to the fact that something had changed. Something was different. Something was here that hadn't been here before, and its presence was rewriting the rules. Harry's phone buzzed. He expected Gomez, more declarations of paternal love, more assurances that the legal team was mobilizing. Instead, It was an unknown number. A single text: "I know what you are, Harrison. And I know what's underneath the school. We should talk." LG. Harry stared at the message. LG. Laurel Gates. The name surfaced from his research. The Gates family, one of Jericho's founding families, with a complicated and violent history involving the outcast community. Laurel Gates was supposed to be dead. Had been declared dead years ago. Thornhill's face surfaced in his mind. Red hair. Warm smile. A void where her magic should be. Laurel Gates. Marilyn Thornhill. The same person. "Wednesday," Harry said, and showed her the phone. Wednesday read the message. Her expression didn't change, but her hand moved to her knife, and her eyes went sharp with the particular focus that meant she'd just reclassified someone from person of interest to target. She's escalating. She's inviting a conversation. On her terms. Do we accept? Harry looked at the message again. "I know what's underneath the school." If that was true, if Thornhill Gates knew about the rift, then she was more dangerous than he'd estimated. And more useful. "We accept," Harry said. "But on our terms, not hers." He typed a reply: "Nevermore Library. Tomorrow. Midnight. Come alone, and come without the mask. I'll know if you're hiding." The response came in seconds: "Fair enough." Harry pocketed his phone and looked out at the night. The school slept below him, full of students who didn't know what was beneath their feet, who didn't know that their magic was being siphoned to seal a rift in reality, who didn't know that their botany teacher was a dead woman wearing a false identity and nursing a grudge old enough to have its own history. They didn't know. But Harry did. And he would protect them, not because a prophecy demanded it, not because a manipulative old wizard had engineered it, not because he owed anyone anything. Because he chose to. Because he was an Addams, and Addamses protected what was theirs, and somewhere between the frozen lake and the confrontation in the entrance hall, Nevermore had become his. The stars turned overhead. The forest breathed. The wards hummed. And far below, in the deep earth, something ancient stirred in its sleep and dreamed of the boy with green eyes who carried death like a lantern, and waited, with the patient hunger of centuries, for the moment when the cage would finally open. Chapter 4, What Hunts in the Dark. The midnight meeting with Thornhill Gates, whoever she was beneath the layers of performance and concealment, didn't happen. At 11:45, 15 minutes before the scheduled time, Harry was crossing the second-floor corridor toward the library when the ward screamed. Not the subtle hum of intrusion he'd felt with the wizarding delegation, this was a full-spectrum alarm, the school's magical immune system firing on all cylinders, every protective enchantment activating simultaneously in response to something that had just gone violently, catastrophically wrong on the northern perimeter. The hide was loose. And this time, it wasn't testing boundaries. Harry felt the creature's psychic signature rip through the forest like a blade through canvas, raw, frenzied, the careful control of its leash shattered. Something had changed. The handler had either lost control or deliberately unleashed the beast without restraint, and the hide was running toward the school at a speed that made Harry's pulse spike. He was at the northern edge of campus in 4 seconds. Not running, translating, his magic compressing the distance between points, folding space the way his family had taught him. One moment he was in the corridor, the next he was standing on the frostbitten grass where the manicured grounds met the wild forest, and the thing that burst from the tree lean was everything Wednesday's visions had promised and worse. It had been human once. You could still see the architecture, the basic bipedal frame, the remnants of a face. But the hide transformation had pushed the body past every natural limit, stretching bone and muscle into something that moved like a nightmare-given physical form. 8 feet tall, maybe 9, hunched and massive, its skin a mottled gray that shifted in the moonlight. Its hands were wrong, too many joints, fingers elongated into talons that dripped with something dark and viscous. And its face, Tyler Galpin's features were still there, stretched and distorted beneath the monster's anatomy like a photograph printed on rubber and pulled until the image warped. His eyes were open and rolling with terror, and his mouth was open in a scream that the hide's vocal cords had twisted into a roar that shook the ground. Harry stood in its path and didn't move. The hide saw him. It charged, not with the calculated approach of their previous encounters, but with the blind, desperate fury of a creature whose leash had snapped and whose only remaining instinct was destruction. It crossed the distance between the Trilene and Harry in 3 massive strides, each footfall cracking the frozen ground, and it swung one massive arm in a blow that would have taken Harry's head off his shoulders and sent it spinning into the lake. Harry caught the arm. Not with his hands, with his magic. A barrier materialized between them, invisible, harder than diamond, shaped exactly to the contour of the hide strike. The creature's talons hit the barrier and stopped dead, and the impact shockwave radiated outward in a ring of force that flattened the grass in a 20-foot circle. The hide screamed. Not the roar of a predator, the scream of Tyler Galpin, the boy underneath, trapped inside a body that had been hijacked and weaponized. Harry heard both voices, monster and victim, layered on top of each other like 2 songs played simultaneously, and the dissonance was horrifying. "Tyler," Harry said. Not shouting. Speaking directly to the boy inside the beast, pushing his voice through the magical barrier with precision, targeting the human consciousness buried under the hide's frenzy. "Tyler, I know you're in there. I know this isn't you." The hide lunged again. Harry sidestepped, smooth, unhurried, the way you'd step around a piece of furniture, and the creature's momentum carried it past him, talons gouging trenches in the earth. It wheeled, snarling, and Harry saw the compulsion magic writhing through its nervous system like barbed wire through flesh. There it was. The leash. Shattered, yes, the main thread of control had been severed, probably deliberately, probably by the handler, but the remnants were still embedded, still firing, still pumping rage and violence into the hide's brain like venom from a broken fawn. The creature wasn't just transformed, it was being chemically and magically driven insane. Even if Tyler surfaced, the compulsion fragments would push him back under in seconds. Harry needed to remove the fragments. All of them. While the hide was trying to kill him. Right then, he muttered. "The hard way." He dropped the barrier and let the hide come. It hit him like a freight train. Harry absorbed the impact with a full-body magical buffer, force distributed across every cell, momentum converted to heat, the kinetic energy of a 9-foot supernatural predator reduced to a warm flush across his skin, and wrapped his arms around the creature's neck. The hide thrashed. Its strength was staggering, outcast physicality pushed to theoretical maximums, every muscle fiber supercharged by the transformation. Harry held on through raw magical reinforcement, his body anchored to the earth by tendrils of power that drove into the ground like roots, and he pressed his forehead against the hide's skull and reached. His magic poured into the creature's nervous system. Not attacking, navigating. He traced the neural pathways, followed the biochemical cascades, mapped the hide's physiology with the precision of a surgeon and the speed of lightning. The compulsion fragments were everywhere, buried in the amygdala, threaded through the hypothalamus, wrapped around the brain stem. Whoever had planted them had known exactly what they were doing. The magic was wizard-grade, sophisticated, and designed to be permanent. Harry burned them out. One by one, fragment by fragment, he found each shard of compulsion magic and dissolved it. Not with force, with precision. His magic was a scalpel, not a hammer, and it moved through Tyler's neural architecture with a delicacy that belied the violence of the physical struggle happening on the surface. The hide screamed again. Convulsed. Its talons raked Harry's back, shredding his shirt, and blood ran hot down his spine, but the wounds closed almost immediately, his magic healing them before they fully opened, tissue regenerating in real time because Harrison Addams's body was a collaboration between flesh and power always won. The last fragment dissolved. The effect was immediate. The hide's frenzy died like a flame with its fuel removed. The creature shuddered, stumbled, and began to shrink, bones retracting, muscles deflating, the monstrous architecture folding back into human proportions with a series of wet, grinding sounds that were deeply unpleasant. Tyler Galpin collapsed in Harry's arms. Naked, shaking, covered in sweat and blood that was mostly Harry's, his eyes wide and white and seeing nothing. He was making a sound, a thin, keening whine, the sound of a person whose mind had been repeatedly hijacked and who had been conscious for all of it, trapped inside a body that killed while he watched. "You're out," Harry said. He lowered Tyler to the ground gently, conjured a blanket from the ambient moisture in the air, water molecules realigned into woven fabric, a trick that would have made a Transfiguration professor weep, and wrapped it around the boy's shaking shoulders. "The compulsion is gone. You're you. Just you." Tyler stared at him. His mouth moved. No sound came out for several seconds, and then, "I killed people." "Something used your body to kill people." "That's not the same thing." "I could see it. I could see everything. I tried to stop, I tried so hard, I know." Harry crouched beside him, and his voice was the voice Morticia used when the nightmares were bad, steady, warm, absolutely certain. "I know what it's like to be used. To have someone take your body, your power, yourself, and turn it into a weapon. You survived it, Tyler. That's what matters right now." Footsteps. Running. Wednesday emerged from the darkness first, knife drawn, moving with the controlled speed of someone who'd been sprinting flat out but refused to arrive looking like it. Behind her, Enid, half transformed, her eyes golden and her nails elongated, the wolf surging just under her skin. Behind them, more students, drawn by the noise. And behind them all, moving with the careful, measured steps of someone who hadn't expected the situation to develop this way, Ms. Thornhill. Harry looked at her over Tyler's shaking form. Their eyes met across the dark grounds, and in the moonlight, he saw her mask slip, just for an instant, just a fraction, and what was underneath was not the warm teacher or the cold operative he'd glimpsed in the corridor. It was panic. She hadn't planned this. The Hyde's rampage wasn't supposed to happen tonight, it was supposed to be controlled, measured, part of whatever long game she was running. Something had gone wrong. The leash had broken because she'd broken it, but not intentionally. Harry read it in her eyes, in the way her hands trembled at her sides, in the way she looked at Tyler with an expression that mixed calculation with something that might have been genuine horror. She'd lost control of her weapon, and she was terrified of what that meant. "He needs medical attention," Harry said, loudly enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "And he needs privacy. Not a spectacle." Weems arrived, breathless and white-faced. She took in the scene. Harry crouched over a shaking, naked boy wrapped in a conjured blanket, the gouged earth, the flattened grass, the fading traces of the Hyde's passage, and her face cycled through shock, fear, and the grim recognition of someone whose worst-case scenario had just materialized on her front lawn. "Get him inside," Weems said. "Now." They moved Tyler to the infirmary. Harry carried him, not because he couldn't walk, but because his legs wouldn't hold him, and Harry's arms were strong and steady and the boy needed to feel safe in a way that walking wouldn't provide. Students watched from windows and doorways as Harry crossed the courtyard with the limp form cradled against his chest, and nobody spoke, and the silence was heavy with the kind of fear that comes from seeing the monster and knowing it was one of them. Wednesday walked at Harry's side. Enid flanked them, her half-transformation slowly receding, her usual bright energy dimmed to something fierce and protective. Xavier appeared from somewhere, drawn by his psychic gift, probably, the screaming of the Hyde loud enough on the psychic frequencies to wake every sensitive in the building, and fell into step without asking questions. They were, Harry realized, forming a perimeter. Instinctively, without discussion, these people, his sister, his roommate, the werewolf girl who'd hugged him, were positioning themselves around him and the boy he carried as a protective formation. Like a family. The thought hit harder than the Hyde had. The infirmary was clean and quiet and run by a medic whose outcast ability was biological empathy, she could feel her patient's physical states as if they were her own. She took one look at Tyler and went pale. What happened to his nervous system? She whispered, her hands hovering over him, reading him. It's shredded. The neural pathways are inflamed, the neurotransmitter levels are. This is like someone ran an electrical current through his brain for months. Someone did, Harry said. Magically. Compulsion charms embedded in his neural architecture. I removed them, but the damage they've done over time will take weeks to heal. Months, maybe. If it heals at all. The medic, MS. Flores, looked at Harry with an expression that was half awe, half horror. You removed compulsion magic from a Hyde's brain. While it was transformed. It seemed like the urgent option. The urgent option was to put it down. That's standard Hyde protocol. Nobody tries to defang a Hyde mid-transformation. It's considered impossible. I know. I didn't get the memo. Harry looked at Tyler, who had curled into a fetal position on the infirmary bed, his eyes squeezed shut, his breathing shallow and rapid. He's a victim, Miss Flores. Not a monster. Someone did this to him deliberately, and he's been trapped inside his own body while it killed people. He needs healing, not judgment. Flores stared at him for a long moment, then nodded and turned to her work. Wednesday caught Harry's arm as he moved to leave. You're back, she said. Harry reached over his shoulder and felt the torn fabric of his shirt. The Hyde's talons had opened 4 parallel gashes from his shoulder blade to his lower back. They'd mostly closed, his magic's regeneration was thorough, but the shirt was ruined and the blood was still wet. It's fine. It's 4 lacerations that would have hospitalized a normal person. Good thing I'm not a normal person. You're deflecting with stoicism. It's your least attractive quality. I thought my least attractive quality was my left eyebrow. You have many unattractive qualities. I maintain a ranked list. Wednesday's hand tightened on his arm, just for a moment. Just enough. You could have been killed. Not by a Hyde. By anything. You keep throwing yourself into danger without what? Without thinking. I thought. I calculated. I assessed the threat, determined the optimal response, and executed it. The boy is alive and free. The compulsion is removed. The immediate threat is neutralized. That's a win, Wednesday. You have claw marks on your spine. Superficial. They go to the bone. Bone is superficial when you can regenerate tissue. Wednesday gave him the look. The one that said I am not going to win this argument, and I resent you for it, and I love you, and if you die I will raise you from the dead and kill you myself. It was a very specific look. Only Wednesday could communicate that much in a single expression. Change your shirt, she said. You're frightening the students. Harry looked down. His shredded, blood-soaked shirt was, admittedly, not the most reassuring visual. He peeled it off right there in the corridor, and the students who happened to be watching got a clear look at his back, the 4 parallel scars, already healed to raised pink lines, fading as they watched, his magic erasing the damage in real time. And beneath the new scars, older ones. The marks from his first life that no magic, however powerful, had been able to erase. The thin white lines on his forearms from Umbridge detentions. The starburst on his chest where the Locket Horcrux had burned him. The lightning bolt on his forehead, hidden by his dark hair but visible from certain angles. And on his back, between his shoulder blades, a mark that didn't belong to any weapon or curse, a symbol, etched into his skin in silver white, the triangle and circle and line of the Deathly Hallows. Harry pulled on a fresh shirt that Wednesday produced from somewhere. She always carried contingency supplies, because an Addams planned for every eventuality including the destruction of clothing, and turned to find Enid staring at him with an expression of dawning comprehension. Those scars, Enid said softly. On your back. The old ones. Those aren't from tonight. No. Someone hurt you. Before. Someone hurt you a lot. A long time ago. In a life that doesn't exist anymore. Harry buttoned the shirt and met her eyes. I'm fine, Enid. That's what people say when they're not fine. It's also what people say when they're genuinely fine and would like to move on. Harry put a hand on her shoulder. Thank you for coming out there. You didn't have to. Of course I did. You saved my life. You think I'm going to stay in bed when you're fighting a monster on the front lawn? Enid's lower lip quivered, and Harry braced for another hug, but she controlled herself. Barely. You're my friend, Harry. That means something. The word friend landed somewhere deep in Harry's chest and lodged there, warm and unexpected and slightly painful, the way good things always were for people who'd spent too long expecting bad ones. Go back to bed, Harry said. We'll talk tomorrow. Promise? Promise. Enid left. Xavier lingered. He was holding his sketch pad, and his face had the haunted, hollowed look of a psychic who'd been too close to something loud. I felt it, Xavier said. The hide. When it was attacking. I felt it screaming, not the monster, the boy inside it. He was screaming and nobody could hear him. He paused. Except you. I have a talent for hearing people who are trapped. Xavier looked at him for a long time. Then he nodded, once, and walked away down the corridor, and Harry heard the rapid scratch of pencil on paper before Xavier had even turned the corner. Drawing again. Processing through art what his conscious mind couldn't contain. The school settled into an uneasy quiet. Harry didn't go back to bed. He went to the library. Thornhill wasn't there. He hadn't expected her to be. Their midnight meeting had been overtaken by events, and a woman whose weapon had just gone haywire in public was not going to stroll into a library for a casual chat. But he checked, because thoroughness mattered, and then he sat at a table in the empty library and began to work. Not on the wards. Not on the investigation. On himself. Harry pulled a blank notebook from the shelf. Librarians in magical schools always left blank books available, an old tradition, and began to write. Not a plan, not a strategy document. A letter. Dear Mrs. Weasley, he stopped. Stared at the words. Crossed them out. Dear Molly, no. Crossed that out too. He sat with the pen in his hand and the blank page in front of him and tried to find the words for something he'd been carrying for 16 years. The weight of his past life, not the trauma, not the betrayal, but the things he'd never said. The conversations he'd never had. The closures he'd never gotten. In his first life, there had been no time. No space between one crisis and the next, no breathing room between prophecy and war and death and the constant, grinding expectation that he would be the hero, would save everyone, would shoulder every burden with a smile and never ask why it always had to be him. He'd never gotten to say goodbye. Not to Sirius, not to Remus, not to Fred, not to Dumbledore, though that goodbye would have been more of a reckoning. Not to the people he'd loved, and not to the people who'd betrayed him. He'd died with 1,000 unsaid things trapped behind his teeth. Harry closed the notebook. The unsaid things would stay unsaid, because some words didn't need an audience. Some truths were just for you, carried in the marrow, taken out only in the dark when nobody was watching.